Ross Scott is the man behind Accursed Farms, best known for his Freeman's Mind Machinima and his many other video series. Ross, welcome to the No Frauds Club. I wanted to start this one off by asking you a bit about one of the more recent things that you've released, chronologically speaking, because you've got quite a career in terms of the back catalog of content that you've produced. One of the things that I think was, at least maybe it might be my favorite video of yours to date, was the UI could be better, a lot better. And you were talking about the experience of using an operating system, of just interfacing with computers. And I don't know how, I can't remember exactly how many times you talked about the topic of, like, basically taking it a step further and what will we be using technologically speaking in 20 years from now or something. But it was one of the first times I had seen a sizable channel on YouTube, or really anywhere, talk about how we can significantly evolve and improve the way that we experience just using computers in general. And that got me thinking in general about, like, well, there's so many different things where there's a funny image thing that people can do if they go to google.com, they go to Google Images, and then they just type frustration. There's so many pictures where it's people getting upset at their computer. And this made me think, like, oh, there's a lot of I would say, I don't know, there's some element of animosity people have towards just using computers now that I feel like is kind of new. And some of that is people adopting late, and so they're not familiar with it. But, you and I, we're more like power users, if you want to use that term. So what are your thoughts now after that video has been released about that kind of software discussion, about how to interface with computers and just how humans are doing it? Have there been any developments after that? Essentially, like, what's going on since that video on that topic?
Well, my first thought is, that's a bit depressing that you said you hadn't seen any other video like that from a major YouTube source, because that unfortunately reinforces what I was worried about. Like, there has been some response, and actually, I wasn't planning to when I made the video, but I am planning now to do a sort of follow-up of a few things I've learned and developed since then. But yeah, thoughts. I mean, I laid out. It was hard making that video because I didn't know, because I'm not an expert on the UI but I use it almost every day, for decades, and just things stack up that bother me that it could be better. So I wasn't sure, like, how to compose my thoughts in a coherent way. Like, okay, well, let's start because, a lot of presentations, you start from, point A and this flows to point B and C. And I tried, but my thoughts were just scrambled on that. It's just, I knew there was something worth saying. I've heard a saying before, intuition is knowing that you're right, but not knowing why. And that's really where it felt like I was coming from. Yeah, for the response to that, one person sent me I'll show this in the follow-up video. One person sent me this study, I think from 1993, where they did a lot of testing on, like, how fast people were responding to doing tasks on the computer, and it backed up geez, I wasn't quite ready for this question. Otherwise, like, maybe could have looked up some more stuff, but it backed up some of what I was saying, and something I left out of the video. But then I should have left it in. According to the study, I talked about, like, intuitiveness. That might not have been the right word exactly, but it's not very intuitive to, like, know a command to type in or know to click on this box or this box, because it's just something you have to learn. That's the procedure. Whereas just simple hand motions like left up, yeah, you're not going to memorize that. It's not any more intuitive to go, like, left up than, like, right down. But I thought there might be some more muscle memory at work if you started developing this sort of systems. And they found something similar with that. They also found that things were even faster using like a tablet drawing than even the mouse for anything, like a stencil kind of for commands. And this was pre-Windows 95, so this was probably fairly objective data for the time, where, it hadn't dominated the entire world, because computers were still kind of, a lot of people didn't have a computer then, and so they could kind of get more, or I guess, uncolored results, I guess, for what they were. I'm definitely gonna link to that when I do the follow-up video. A few people have sent me prototype ideas of like, apparently it's called a pie menu, which I didn't even know the term for it at the time when I made the video. I figured I wasn't the first person to thought of any of this stuff, but it's just I hadn't seen this vocalized, and it just bothered me like on a small level almost every day. But yeah, with the pie menu system, you move to one area, then it expands other options, and you move there. I still need to try some more of those. I've got a couple on that. But the thing is, it's not like that was the end all idea that I had. I mean, I'm just sort of fumbling around, realizing there's a problem. Yeah, that's another quote I've seen before, but I forget where. I think it was from a game forum, and it was something like, when the users claim there is a problem, they're almost always right. However, their solutions may not be. It's so in other words, what they think might be the answer may not actually be the answer, but their recognition of the problem is almost always like a legitimate thing for the developer to take care of. I've since switched to Windows 10 since I made that video, and it is
My condolences.
more locked down. Yeah, it's a mix. It took me a while. I switched to it on my terms, which is so it doesn't update without my permission. That's a big one. I probably haven't blocked all the telemetry. I'm sure it's probably sending something, but a blocked chunk of it. I don't lose my configuration settings under any scenario. So I'm actually remembering. You said I'm welcome to talk about other stuff. I'm remembering in this lore book a friend of mine had in Dungeons and Dragons. They had end destinations of your characters, like if you've gone through a full campaign, where they end up. And one of the options I think for a wizard was to become a lich, where you're immortal, but you do it on your terms. You didn't take the normal way of like contacting some demon that takes your soul for it, but so you retain your faculties and everything. So that's kind of how I feel about moving to 10. But yeah, with the on 10, the the visuals of it, it's more like things like window blinds, which has become almost the only game in town now for skinning it. I haven't gotten to work with high DPI scaling, and as resolutions and on monitors increase, that means everything's going to be kind of blurry. I saw a post from Stardock. I might link to this in the follow-up video also, where they said that basically Microsoft's kind of making their lives hell because they're kind of abandoning any sort of standards for the UI, and they're encouraging more and more developers to just kind of create their own for the application. But at the same time, they're not making it easy to hook into a lot of elements. So it sounds like it's the worst of both worlds, but it sounds like Stardock is trying to adapt, but it might take them another year or so. So that's just for basic visuals. Oh yeah, that's another thing I mentioned. Either since I made that video or else I noticed it since then. Somebody put up an online link to a skin museum for the program Winamp, and where a lot of people like in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of people used Winamp as like the go-to music player, especially for MP3s. And the thing is, there are tens of thousands of skins for that. Whoever you are, you can find a skin you like on there. And I wanted to show that as an example of what it looks like when there's not all these barriers for creative people to kind of make things look nicer.
Yeah. That's an
But
example too. Like you also
yeah, good.
referenced Stardock, and to me that just reminds me of like I'm somebody who's owned Groupie for maybe a year now, and that's the one where it automatically can group together windows of the same program. And I mostly just use it for Explorer or Command Prompt, but like even then, there's a lot of really obvious bugs where if you switch to a different virtual desktop and then you Alt Tab, and suddenly your
Oh man, yeah.
Explorer is on the other monitor, like one window from it has moved into a different desktop, and you got to like reassemble it. So, and that's stuff that they've struggled with forever because of the fact that, I mean, they're aware of the problem. They've been trying to fix it, according to, if you read through the patch notes, they've been trying to fix it for at least several months now. And it's just been an issue probably since Windows 10, maybe earlier. So that's like an example of these, software being artificially in some ways, or just maybe negligently designed in such a way that, like you said, you can't hook into it and even make elegant changes. Everything's got to be
What's
locked
hell
in.
too is the development style for Windows 10 and onward. Also, they moved to the agile development where it's just constant. In my opinion, it's a perpetual beta because there's never, or at least for most users, I guess maybe for corporate environments there's never like once a year or once every 2 years, like, okay, here's like a real stable version. We've incorporated all the features the past couple of years. But if you want groundbreaking stuff, you're going to have to go on the more experimental builds in the coming months or something. And for most users, that isn't an option. It's just they're just always pushing out updates. Yeah, I think I mentioned in the video, they fired their QA department, and it's mostly AI checking, debugging now. So the users are kind of the beta testers for that, which I almost could accept that if there was an actual stable points you could go to. It's like, oh, okay, these past updates aren't so good. Let's just go back. Let's just stay on this version until they get things sorted out. But they kind of continually push you forward without getting your hands pretty dirty trying to block that out. I mean, so that makes it hard for any third party company also to get a foothold, because let's say there was like a competitor to Stardock that they wanted to skin Windows, and then like the next update just invalidates half their work or more. So with no warning, I mean, it's a very backwards way of doing things. I think it really puts the onus of having some sort of software development kit or API on Microsoft's end. So that way they don't have to compromise the security. You shouldn't have to compromise the security to change the icons or the colors or the or the bitmap that you're using. I mean, yeah, I'm trying to think of other feedback I got. I still need to go deeper into it. I really think my best option for you, because I was kind of covering usability and I was covering the sort of cosmetic side of things too. So for usability, I really do think like mouse gestures are going to be what I'm going to do in the future. And in fact, my mouse then died since then, but on the current one I have, there are these little, let's see, where are they? Oops. I moved your screen here on my end. Yeah, there are these little, I probably can't see it, side buttons here, which I never hit by accident. So those will be ideal for me to just map the gestures, because then I won't have to, then if I'm in the middle of something, I won't be hitting them by accident. See, that's what you don't want from a gesture if you're clicking and the moving things around quick. Like, okay, let's launch your music player. Or like, okay, time to close these windows. Like, that's what you really want to avoid. So, I mean, it was only a half joke in the video when I said it felt like I'm developing a martial arts, because I mean, that stuff's been very established, or else it's been building off of, like, if you were to develop your own martial arts style now, you would have just, eons of background and studied technique to build off of. But it's like we're just stumbling around in the dark. Like, if somebody, it's like the old days of like mapping functions to the keyboard where C is crouch because it begins with a C, and M is map because it begins with an M. I mean, it's like that's the level of thought that's gone into it. So it's nothing ergonomic about it at all. A few people point out I had like one or two contradictions in it where it was my bad and just trying to compose all my thoughts more clearly, but they were relatively minor. I'll cover that in the follow-up. I did get some feedback. I think it's kind of a vocal minority. I got a lot of feedback on the Linux end of things, trying to defend the command line. I'll address that more in the. It's not that I'm trying to get rid of it, but it seems so obvious to me the command line is not good for just an average user or for somebody who's doing something else. That's I I'd be curious how many non-developers prefer the command line to having a more intuitive interface. But again, I think we can do better than like even the mouse even. Well, that's what that study from 1993 showed, that the tablet writing. But I have several notes and a hodgepodge of things. I'll get into something coherent later on, but unfortunately, not the breakthrough. Oh, yeah, that was the one last thing I was going to say. I did get a lot of, I did get a fair chunk of feedback from actual designers, people who have studied this stuff and maybe gone to school for it, and their general impressions were that it was a bit of a relief, but also kind of disappointing. See, I was kind of worried part of the reason for this was just sort of dogma and people learning things that may not necessarily be true and the ideas hadn't been challenged. And it sounds like, at least from the academic side of things, that's not the case. This is well understood and there's room for it. It's just that in the industry, nobody cares. So they're just kind of I got the feeling. I got the feeling from a lot of designers that like they kind of had their spirits crushed a long time ago, and they were just sort of weighing in on it. So, like they agreed with the general sentiment of what the video was trying to express. But
Right, but they were pretty convinced that it was unlikely there was going to be a sea change in the actual
yeah,
industry
yeah.
side
Well,
of
I mean,
things.
it's. I mean, the monopolistic state of a lot of computing is part of the problem, unfortunately. But although, hey, Microsoft is doing their best to try to get me off the platform. You may have heard lately, what on future editions of Windows, starting with 11, the new installs are going to require an internet connection and a Microsoft account. Before that was not mandatory, and that's kind of my line in the sand. I want to. There's still that's not 100% a lockdown because there might be cracks for that sort of thing. And also, if you made an image file, then you can still keep your system offline. And then Windows 10 at least is pretty good at adapting to new hardware, even from the same install. Like if you take an image of a Windows machine, put it on a completely different one, you might need to hunt down some drivers, but you can transfer it that. And in the past, that was a very iffy proposition on a previous version of Windows. So.
What this makes me think of is that, for a while, I'm not a hardware or data security expert or anything like that, but for a long time, I've wanted somebody to come out, and it's probably out there and I just haven't researched it enough, but I wanted somebody to come out with a study or some sort of like in-depth technical explanation that is filtered through for the layman so that they can understand it, where they explain how important it actually is to keep your software up to date with security updates specifically. And it feels like it's like Microsoft has these security updates, and assuming we take them at their word and say, yeah, actually conventional wisdom is true, you should update your computers with like Windows Update, it provides a service and protects you in that way. If there are going to be these security updates that are so important, it would be really nice of Microsoft to not like sneak in their garbage along with it and so release them separately so that we can benefit from that. And I think that would even be if you want to go into corporations and morals, that would be the moral thing to do, is have that be a separate thing. And then you have whatever the other updates are that may not, like your point about the agile development and their firing of the QA team. These things might break and reduce and degrade my experience as an end user. So I want the security stuff, assuming that's actually necessary. And I haven't done enough research to know if that's true. But I don't want anything else. And that's why I'm always spam clicking don't update, or like you said, it's probably like a group policy thing or something to just completely shut it off.
I can tell you how I have to go through a few steps, but like I went through multiple steps and I still saw the updater coming up. I don't know if it was all those steps and this in combination and my firewall, but I for sure part of the solution for me was the program Windows Update Blocker. So look into that. If it might take more than that, but that's the thing. I did so much research and experimentation on this. I don't even know what exactly was the one thing. If it was just one thing that stopped the updates and that's all I needed, but I just didn't even want to experiment. It's like a superstition where you went through these steps and it works. So you don't even want to try doing it with like less of the steps.
And every day you put on the socks in the same order to make sure Windows Update doesn't
Yeah,
start up
yeah,
again. Yeah.
it's almost on that level. Well, I mean, I think it's at this point, I think it'd be kind of naive to look at like what's moral for the company or what they. I mean, if you really want to go down that road, I think you have to look more at antitrust law because it's not going to come from Microsoft's end. Whereas they are so much more entrenched now than they were. What was it, 2001 or something, when the Department of Justice lawsuit was against them, and that was just for bundling Internet Explorer with Windows. I mean, you would think them shipping it with an entire store that requires your login for the would be even more of a competitive issue under that logic. But okay, so sorry, I forgot part of your previous question.
Oh no, I was just commenting on the fact that the
Oh, the updates.
Microsoft with the security updates and all
Yeah,
that,
well,
right?
I'm not sure how much of it is documented with each update if they explain exactly what it does. My guess is they probably don't want to bother with every last little thing and just list the more major stuff unless there is an ulterior motive. Like one of the more famous examples was like when Windows 10 was coming out and they were offering the free upgrade on Windows 7, that there were some cases where it's confirmed that they pushed. So that's the thing. I know as I'm saying this, there's going to be somebody who says, no, that never happened. That's a myth. It wasn't equal on everyone's system. That's what I found out also. It's like they might have pushed some updates out to some users, but not to others. Or, I mean, a friend of mine has a conspiracy theory that maybe they're selecting some of the users as sort of surprise beta testers, you know? But what they pushed out was it would either force the update or they give you the option to update. And then if you click X, then the close Windows symbol, which has been that way for decades, then that they took that as an acceptance that yes, you wish to update to migrate to Windows 10. I mean, that doesn't sound like an accident to me. That sounds like, I mean, but yeah, I mean, they've kind of ruined the. Okay, well, that's the other thing. You're talking about security updates. There are some things that are just accidents that I think comes from not having a QA department where they've just ruined the trust, at least for me. Like I want to say like every other month I'm reading some article about some major problem that has come from an update. I mean, I've seen ones on multiple blue screens. For a while there was one where if you print, that would cause a blue screen, and that wouldn't affect me because I don't even have a printer hooked up. But then there was another one I read about where it said it broke VSync on a lot of programs and caused many issues with old game compatibility. I was thinking, oh wow, I'm glad I missed that one because that would have been like a torpedo for what I do.
Yeah, there's loads of updates throughout Windows 10's history, more recent in the last 2 years, that have just made it so that your game performance playing any game, Counter-Strike was famously affected by this recently, and that's a game that's obviously played at like a competitive level. Suddenly, if you're updating your PCs at tournaments, you're like sabotaging the competitive integrity suddenly, like just because of Microsoft and not even because of something else. So that's
yeah,
one example.
I can't remember I think I did put that in the video. The Twitch video of the guy playing Counter-Strike and then Windows 10 decided to update in the middle of his match.
Classic.
Yeah, and you see his face just like, like just complete shock.
Yeah, it's just it's like an incessant race to the bottom in many ways, I feel like. And that's, unfortunately, I feel like that kind of characterizes software in general, because Windows 7 to Windows 10 has like, okay, Windows 10 requires more baseline specs, right? And now it's like a minimum of 4 gigabytes of RAM. I'm not even sure Windows 11 might even be higher. And that was unthinkable even a few years ago, that your operating system would be gobbling up that much system resources. But now you're seeing like, oh yeah, if you don't, and games are going the same way. If you don't have like 16 gigs of RAM or 8 gigs of RAM, like 8 gigs was a crazy number a while ago. Now that's like seen as, bordering on the poverty line if you only have that many. For modern games
have more of an excuse, though, I'd say, because text. If you want really high detail,
Yes.
those textures add up. I mean, it's when you're talking about these giant open worlds and people running in 4K or something. I mean, and where they're expecting textures can balloon the size of a lot of projects. So it's games at least have an excuse. Yeah, I think like well I think the un uncontested winner on that would be, was it Microsoft Flight Simulator, where like where they stream in data from Bing Maps, they're from satellite imagery of basically the entire Earth, and like the grand, and you can only download like chunks of it for, like for your flight route. Otherwise, the rest is just kind of generated based off AI. But I think the total amount of data you could theoretically use if you want to just fly everywhere under the highest fidelity is something, I want to say it's like 2 petabytes. So
Yeah, I don't know too many too many hard drives
textures
that
will
have that
do
much.
it.
Yeah.
Textures will do it. But I mean, as for Windows, it'd probably be better to interview someone who is more of a hardware expert to tell you like why we're needing more resources thrown at it. I mean, I am. I do notice like some things will be quick, some things will be sluggish. I mean, I don't have the background to be able to really know exactly because obviously if you were making an operating system from scratch, you could get it probably performing much better. However, part of the reason Windows is dominant is because so many programs are for it. So they want to retain as much legacy functionality as they can, and maybe that leads to more overhead that I'm unaware of. On the other hand, I want to say Windows 10 has something like, I want to say the number is like 400 or 500 points of telemetry. Let's see, Windows 10 points of. So not all of this is just to make your system work well. I mean, they want to. They have an interest in it too. I mean that. I guess the data collection. I mean, I'm still kind of baffled in like the modern age that's still so valuable, but I mean, I guess it
Yeah,
must be.
I can't personally see how it is, but that's probably the point
Yeah,
almost, is that like if you're naive to its uses, you won't be as offended by the fact that you're giving it up for free.
yeah, like I'm not the number one privacy advocate. I mean, I'm glad that people work on it, but if it's, especially now that I have broadband, like, I mean, back in the old days of dial-up, that would be more unthinkable to me because that's cutting out, that's choking out what little bandwidth I have. But I mean, the way I look at it is, it's kind of like if somebody was running a stakeout outside of my house, where they're just monitoring. It's like, all right, I can live with that. Whereas I see the mandatory updates and changing configuration settings and maybe breaking functionality. I see that more like a home invasion, and that's where I can't tolerate it. But I mean, I guess this is probably what's going to mark like a generational way of looking at things. I mean, I'm guessing. No, I mean, I have no idea how the younger generation looks at it. Like, I'm guessing they don't like it, but it's probably they're so used to it. It's just, it's probably seems silly trying to fight against it. Kind of like, I'm trying to think of like what a historical analogy would be, like complaining about pollution from cars compared to horses. I don't
Okay,
know.
there you go. That's one
Uh,
example. I always give the example when I'm talking about like the quality of games or the kinds of games you can even have, is that a lot of people grow up and their first game, maybe their only real game for a long time, is Fortnite. And to somebody like you and I, who've played maybe thousands of games by now, it's like, well, surely that's not the end of your gaming experience. Like there's more to it than that, but
well,
some people
that
just
has
play that.
more. That might have more significance though, because then, I mean, Fortnite, I don't follow it too much, but I mean, it's like constantly changing, isn't it? They're having like new seasons and stuff. So it could be as they get older, they may really want to be able to have like the old version of it. Like what happened with World of Warcraft, like the people wanting to go back to the original version.
Yeah, that's a sentiment shared by a lot of people. League of Legends is another game that evolves over time, and I stopped playing that a long, long time ago. But I know loads of people who are like, "Yeah, let's go back to one of the earlier seasons because this stuff is, it get after so many changes, maybe you just get tired of it." That's a whole like game design topic we could touch on if you were interested. But that's like also just the thing where you definitely do see people who, as the game evolves, it leaves behind a certain number of people who are disaffected but with the changes and wanted to enjoy the game that they had. Which also kind of connects to another thing that you've started to become embroiled in the last year or so, or I guess the last couple of years in general, is the whole games as a service thing and the dead game news cycle where there's people who don't get to play the game that they want anymore. It's a harder argument to make for people who have been playing a game that's been updated and changed beyond all recognition, but it's almost a similar kind of subject where, somebody wants to play this game and they literally can't anymore. So I don't know if there's anything that's been burning your brain about that recently as far as
No, I need to step things up. I'm
Sure.
kind of looking at it like, I think my best shot is I'm about ready to raise the white flag in the USA, but France has much stronger consumer protection laws, and they had a ruling against Valve. It was about the being able to resell your digital copy of the game, which I don't have a stake in. However, the logic they were using on that was almost identical to what I was making in my games as a service video. So this sounds like a complete opening if I can contact the consumer group, or I want to. The only reason I haven't is I need to figure. Well, I've been busy, but I need to figure out the smartest way to do it. Like maybe it's better if it's not just me contacting and there are like hundreds of people contacting him, or maybe that would congest things. And I've been meaning to reach out more to some like French game preservation people on that, but that's going to be my real shot and see how that goes. If that can gain traction, that might be all or nothing for me on that, because it's that and veering off towards not exactly saving the game, but using AI to extract like a lot of worthwhile content from it. I've definitely been diving into that. But
the Dream software I've heard you refer to.
Yeah. I've been finding some pretty solid what I'm calling stepping stones.
Okay.
That.
Anything you wanted to talk about here, or is that more for your own videos somewhere down the line?
I can talk about it. No, by all means, I'll get some help.
There you go.
What seems to, it's like we're so close on this. Not to the Dream software, which is the idea was you could use AI to basically extrapolate the game worlds and recreate it. That may still happen, but what's either happening now, just if it moved a little bit to the left, it would open up so many things, or it's almost there, is generating 3D material from 2D images or in video. And I've been very impressed by what I've seen of that. I'd say sort of I'm not sure if it was developed by Intel or not, but the the name of the algorithm or the software for this is Midas, like King Midas, and what it'll do is it'll take a video and it uses machine learning to generate depth maps of the image, and then from there, the part I've been struggling with is getting that from, you have the video image, you have the depth map, and then getting that converted to a 3D object that would kind of be continually animated. And I want to actually, literally just last night, I found some software that did it. It's in an alpha state. I think it's called. Let me get the URL. I think it's called VRIN. Dot. Let's see. Here it should be in my browser history. Yeah, VRIN.app. This guy was trying to do it on the fly, like in real time, and that was chugging like hell when I tried it. But the results were very impressive. However, he was using an older version of this, where what happens is it generates good depth, but for video, it will fluctuate badly with the depth map. Like, oh, it's brighter in this frame darker in this frame. And since that's translating 3D data, that causes this kind of spazzing out mess. However, there's been another version of that that's been much more stable that I have a link to somewhere. Yeah, I forget the term for this. It's something like monocular estimation of stuff. But that one was much short version is that version was much more stable. And I'll say this, like for anyone who's looked at a 3D game and then you've tried it in VR and then you realize like how different it looks and feels, even though you thought you knew that game or that world, but just seeing it in real 3D. I was seeing this with just video material, and it was just like it was. Yeah, it wasn't perfect, but it was staggering how potentially good it was. So I'm trying to. Yeah, I think there's a term for this. Apparently, it's called 6DOF, like 6 degrees of freedom video. However, from what I can tell, that encompasses kind of two different concepts. One is just taking the depth data, merging it with the video, making a 3D model of that so that when you get closer, it's like you're a little closer in the world. Now, obviously, if you stray off way to the side and look around, then it all looks distorted and it's a complete mess. But if you're looking straight on, it's just incredible. It's just so immersive with it. I was talking with a friend last night, and I was saying, and where some guy was showing a comparison of like different techniques, and the video only had 600 views. And I said, I don't know if this is the sort of thing where just a handful of people are going to be trying this thing and experiencing some of like the most incredible worlds they've seen, or if in 10 years billions of people have experienced something like this. Like, I can't tell, like, if this is just going to be like this incredible technology and experience that only just this small niche of people are going to experience, or if it's just going to explode. I can't tell. But I mean, because it was just flooring me, and it's like almost there because that VRIN.app, it was trying to generate it real time, and it was not there yet, and it was cutting corners with the quality of the depth to make it real time, which, I mean, I might get there eventually, but and then there was another program, 6DOF Viewer, which was released on Oculus, Vive, and Mixed Reality, which is what I had, which seemed to do exactly what I'm trying to do, like take the depth map, combine it with the 3D data, and then it's like you're converting anything you want to look at into 3D, pretty promising 3D. I mean, it's almost like black magic considering what it's working with, but and then that program just didn't run. Like, I just could not get it running. And so it's like I'm just going crazy here trying to get this to work. I even have a thread in my forum open trying to get help on it, so we'll see.
Yeah, maybe there's some VR technician watching this who might know a little bit of
or
little
just
thing or two.
no. What I need right now is convert. If you have video and you have a depth map, like combine them into like a dynamic 3D model that's kind of changing on the go as the depth map change. That doesn't sound impossible to me. That sounds like something we could do. Like the magic part has already been done almost with the depth map generation. So I'm really interested in where we're going with AI.
Yeah, it seems like it can do
see it opening all kinds of doors.
Yeah, it's got like a shortcut almost to so many different things that otherwise would take so much time. I've thought about this for so long because I come from an RTS content creation background where I'm making these very I'm trying to put a lot of effort into making the environment be detailed but also functional. And I was thinking maybe years ago now, like, what would it look like if I could just think this into existence instead of having to manually place all these tiles and all this other stuff? Of course, the ancillary thought, like the thought right adjacent to that, is what if I don't have to do any of that and it just sort of happens through AI? And part of me thinks, I mean, maybe I have to think this way because I'm the one doing it. It would be like if somebody said there's an AI that will generate like the movie that you want to make and all this other stuff. Like, you almost have to think that no, I have to be part of that. Like, otherwise it won't be the same thing.
Oh no, I don't care.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm not too proud of that. So I'm looking at the end destination. Like, if a computer did my job for me and made me irrelevant, if I can, well, yeah. I mean, I guess as long as you can keep a roof over your head and eat, that's the important part. Yeah, I don't want to discount that part of it, but yeah, no, great. I mean, if the computer could write a better script than I could, that would be even.
Interesting.
I
That's
welcome that.
I want to almost drill deeper on that, like, because as like the way I come from it is like, I only I care about the game that I want to make because I want to experience that game. So in some ways, I see where you're coming from. Where like as long as the end result is here, I will be satisfied. But I almost feel like I've done it for so long. I've been doing the development side of things for so long that if it was just magically done by a computer or by anything, like say somebody else just releases a game that is literally as good or if not better than anything I was thinking of, like I would feel like if I stopped making my own thing, then I would almost feel like I have to rediscover
if it
some
hit you
purpose.
midway or
Yeah.
3/4 of the way, yeah, that would be very painful. I
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah, because then you just throw all this work into it, and if you had just waited, you could have done it, and that's like, what did I do? You know? No, I get that. But I'm saying, like, say you finish your project, you got your game out, and then like a couple years, and then you're maybe toying with the idea of another one, then it came out. The technology will let you do that. So you might, and then if you would never, I mean, yeah, it's I'm I'm not sure we're there yet, but yeah, you mentioned shortcuts. Like the my first thought when seeing this stuff last night, I mean, just the really kind of broken, spastic version of it that I could tell needs a lot of work, but it really just needs like a couple things tuned to get really good. Like I'd say 95% where I want it to be. What it was reminding me of is like this feels like I'm literally in like some 90s movie sci-fi thing, like, you know, where like the CGI wasn't quite great, but you could kind of see the like something like Lawnmower Man or Virtuosity or something where they're, you know, you can kind of tell it's a little over the top and not perfect and everything, but it's like, man, this is really amazing.
Yeah, you're
Like,
seeing the potential start to take shape, like
oh
right in front of
yeah,
your eyes.
very,
Yeah.
very clearly. And the thing is, it's not like I'm sure there's a long road to go in refining it, but there's not a long road at all towards getting a really amazing experience, which is what's driving me nuts. Like on this,
It's
so.
yeah, it feels like it's just out of reach,
Oh,
and you could
it's
easily.
just,
Yeah.
it is almost, yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. This drills back into, or this dovetails nicely with the other thing that I've noticed is that, you know, sometimes you won't have much of a liking to the actual narrative within a game, but you might really like that game's world and like the
Yeah, yeah.
experience of navigating it and looking around.
All
And
kinds of games like that.
yeah, and to some degree, I can totally identify with that because I've played a lot of games that are more on rails. Like Half-Life is actually an example of that, where there's theoretically a world around you, but you can only go where the developers want you to go. And so maybe there's like
I'm
different
well aware
paths.
of that, making
Yeah.
Freeman's mind.
Right,
Yeah.
of course. And so there's different paths that you could take to get to the same destination, maybe in some areas. But for the most part, it's like, well, you go from this place, like point A to point B, and how you get there is probably pretty limited. So when you're dealing with something like that, like it almost must feel like the ultimate temptation or like slap in the face, like teasing in a way where it's like, there's this world out here that you might like, you know, but you can't go that direction, which looks really
Well,
cool.
I guess I guess the upside of that is I know a little bit. I probably know more than the average person how games are made. So I realize that, like, yeah, but you know, then they'd have to render all the models and then get that level made, and then maybe add more text. So I kind of, you know, it's I think part of me understands that, so I try not to. I guess it's when I really like the game that like I want more, and then there's not more. That's when you start
Can you
feeling.
talk to me a bit about the process that you, or like what kinds of worlds actually do draw you in that sense? Because obviously you've played loads of different kinds of games. Like there's the genre of game, but then there's also like the genre of style it's in. Like it could be a Western or a space opera or
Geez,
whatever.
yeah.
And so like, are there certain things that I've heard you talk about like some environments you dislike, but I'm not sure if you've ever like given
I like
examples directly
many
of that.
different ones. I
Hmm.
mean, I'm thinking like ones I definitely get interested in a lot. Also, with my reading, I like the idea of like alternate societies, like science fiction societies, where like it's different. Like things develop a different way. It could be like on another planet or different timeline, or so it's kind of like, yeah, you have some grounding of what to expect, but then there's other things you're not sure what's happening here. That's always a theme I like a lot. I like stuff in general where it kind of feels like you're kind of going out into the unknown and it looks nice. Like, and that can take the form in a lot of different things. Like again, I'm a fan of like big foreboding jungles going into that, or forest, or like landing. Or geez, I'm thinking like all the way back to like some like Super Metroid, where you're just kind of going deeper and deeper into this alien civilization, these ruins of this alien civilization and ecosystem that you're not sure what to expect. Um, let's see, what were some other things I like? I mean, if you're thinking of examples, okay, I'll scroll down some of my games list here. Maybe I get some ideas. I mean, it really varies. I can like, I mean, even simple things like just contemporary games like racing or driving games. If they're making it just, if the aesthetics of it, they just make it look wonderful. Like it's like, oh yeah, I'd want to live here. Like then, yeah, then that can be. Yeah, you mentioned with games. I mean, this isn't a hard science or anything, but I'm thinking with games, I sometimes almost think of it like a sort of a trinity where you can have things that will draw me in. One can be writing, one can be gameplay, and another can just be the atmosphere, like the experience of it. So some of those just aren't even relevant. There's plenty of games where like the writing is just completely irrelevant, and then there's others, like especially adventure games, where the gameplay aspect is pretty minimal, and they kind of blur the line between like an interactive movie or something, but the story could be really interesting, that sort of thing. So I can swing a lot of different ways on that sort of thing. Yeah, sorry, I don't have more of a concrete
No,
answer
that's
for
fine.
you. Oh,
One of the things that
it's
seems to be a
oh yeah,
running
go ahead.
theme in the way that you describe the kinds of environments that pull you in. There's the contemporary ones that just look nice, but then one of the things I noticed is that you almost like to discover something that is unknown currently, or maybe even like really difficult to comprehend. So like you gave the example of alternate societies and stuff like that, where there's something enough to get around where you kind of know what to expect with some parts, and then you just discover something that like floors you or is completely like takes a while to get, you get culture shock just from interacting with it. But then there's also the exploration of this ruined civilization or something like that, where you're venturing into stuff that is unknown, and there's that like natural inclination to explore. Probably, I imagine, lends well to the idea of having this dream software that you can provide.
Oh,
This is the blueprint for the environment. Now let me explore, this side path that I couldn't go down in the game, right? I feel like these two concepts anyway are inexorably linked for where you're coming at them from.
I imagine someone who's not me could probably observe better what I'm doing than
Okay, fair enough.
I would. So, uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, I was also thinking it's just like what you mentioned with the GUI that I noticed. It's that if say you take these worlds, I mean, gamers go to insane lengths for some games, like to do things. Like I think there was like this texture enhancement project for, I think it was Near Automata, where or maybe it was the original one, where this person spent years just going through like these or people were doing that for Oblivion, and I think in Skyrim for either. If you look at just how much work goes into these, it's like, God, it would be so nice if we could just make as many games or game worlds as accessible as possible for modification and people utilizing like that, because it just would unlock so many different things, is the way I see it. Like with the GUI, I'm not the best artist, but I'd really like it if the best artist, it would be easy for the best artist to kind of work on a great interface. Or it's the same thing with kind of games and games worlds. It's like I know there's so much potential walled off from how it currently is, but I am quite optimistic about where AI is headed.
You talked about giving the tools or the freedom for the greatest artist in the world to start working on something like a modified GUI, and that obviously it links back to the point you made about like blinds for Windows and that being one of the only games in town, but also very limited based on the tools that they have. It feels like a consistent theme or trend is that customization is like often left by the wayside, and developers just give you this one thing that you can do. Whereas, I mean, that was another thing that you brought up in the GUI video that I remember identifying with a lot is that it used to be normal to expect that if I didn't like the way the default layout was in something, I could customize it to my heart's content. You just can't really do that in operating systems and in many programs these days. It's like the more popular things get, like the more they want a one size fits all solution, is what it feels like.
I think this has to do more, again, it's not that I was seeking to make a video on that, but I think it's inextricably linked to how dominant Microsoft is. I think it's valued at like a $2 trillion company right now or something like that. I mean, I've heard some people say, "Oh, it's not technically a monopoly because there are other like for something like PC gaming, I think it's something like 96, 98% of the market is on Windows." So that sounds that that would certainly pass the what was that antitrust law? I'm drawing a blank on the name. That would certainly pass historic standards for does this have a monopoly share of the market, even if it's not a 100% true every single last computer on earth runs Windows kind of monopoly. So the thing is, once you have monopoly status, then you don't have to care about this. And they're a publicly traded company, so the bottom line is whatever makes the most money. So it's not, see, my thought would be, gee, if I had a company worth $2 trillion, I would have a QA department just to keep it smooth and running, and I would have a more robust R&D division to like stay ahead of any potential competitors, just, kind of earn our place as being the best, like let's make it insurmountable for people, because why not? We have the money to do so. And then you could have pride in the work, pride in the product. But uh, I I have to imagine someone at top level has decided that no, it's just going to be easier for us and less resources expended if we just have one way we do it, lock that down. Who cares if it doesn't matter? It's not like the Department of Justice is coming after us. It's not like people are gonna move to Mac for this demographic, or if Mac's not doing it either, then we don't need to. Or so it leads to a kind of a stagnation. And actually, I almost look at like a lot of what's happening. Like, I mean, this is sort of a microcosm, but it's probably occurring in other ways. Almost sort of like a neo-feudalism where, Microsoft in this case is like the lord of the land. They have their castle set up. They have their guards and the villages established. Nobody's gonna dethrone them, so they can kind of do what they want. I mean, it would just have to be so bad that it would have to be something so bad that it would get the modern Department of Justice to come after them, because it causes so many problems for so many other lords in the land that to make them want to come after them. So it's just kind of, I feel more like kind of a mouse trying to navigate all this. I don't know.
I think we all feel you there as far as that's concerned, because when there is really only one game in town when you want to do gaming, I'm sure the Linux diehards gave you some trouble about that comparison in the video, but like if that's the only thing you can go to, then there is no other option really.
I'm actually going to make I have another video coming out related to gaming, and then not to spoil too much on that, but in that video I was going to talk some about Linux in it, and I realized I had so many things to say. The Linux people are going to get their own video from me, so they'll get all my thoughts on Linux, and it may not be what they expect actually. So it's not going to be just me bashing Linux at all. It's like my general attitude on Linux is like that poster Mulder has in the X-Files of "I want to believe," and he has a UFO. That's how I feel about Linux. But in the X-File, Mulder needs evidence. He's not just a blind follower. He debunks fakes. So I feel a lot like that. That's my general attitude about Linux.
Yeah, fair enough. We talked about software trends, and one of the things I wanted to get your opinion on is there's been obviously you've been observing games for a while, and I say observing because you're not always somebody who plays them to completion. Sometimes if it loses your interest, you'll go and watch a playthrough of it instead. Uh,
Yeah.
are there trends in games, like a particular kind of thing that's happened, either something that's gone away, like we talked about customizability and operating systems, but like specific to games, has there been something that's gone away that you wish had stayed? Has there been anything that's has emerged that you wish didn't come in? And obviously, there's also the positive angle. Is there anything that you're glad we grew out of or happy we grew into? Anything like that come to mind for games?
Uh, well, I get, yeah, I mean, so much. I feel like games now, it's everything. Like you like things are worse, things are better, because like I think from major studios, like you have a lot of, well, I mean, of course, to get it out of the way, the thing that just overshadows everything with me is having games dependent on a central server so that when the companies stop supporting it, the game is dead forever. That just drowns out every single other thing for me as far as negative practices. I mean, because I can't shut it off in my brain. It actually like it bothers me when I play games like that, knowing that yeah, that's gonna go down at some point. My brain won't shut it off. So it's definitely a peace of mind thing when I know that like yeah, I can run the game now. I can run it 20 years from now. It's fine. Um so everything else is secondary to that. But yeah, for well, I guess my general attitude about this is like the trends, it doesn't even get to me too much because I feel like, let's say a lot of games have a trend I don't like some like loot boxes. Like I don't really care about them, but I do feel like it kind of cheapens the game, like the aesthetic. Like if I'm trying to get into the world and I have a reminder, like, hey, you can pay money to credits for this. Okay, like it's waking me up and like reminding me, okay, this is just a game that's a cash vessel for the company and not me trying to defeat the ogre of the land or something like that. So I do think the more reminders you have that this is like a product and not just like a
Not an
experience
experience,
or an
yeah.
adventure that you're going on, then that cheapens it. But I guess my attitude on that is that there are so many games now that it's kind of like, okay, well, I don't like these. There's some years that, like for AAA titles, I'm not particularly interested in any of them because maybe thematically they're not my thing. Where like, okay, this one's like a historical shooter. It's like, well, I know how World War II ended. I can like I'd rather do something that's a little more unknown for me. Or let's see, what I'm trying to think is, or like an Assassin's Creed set in a time period where it's like, well, I'm not really that into that one. Maybe I'll, or so let's say like a whole roster of games I'm not interested in. Well, there's probably hundreds of indie games that have come out in that time period that like, oh, okay, yeah, this looks interesting, and it might be some sort of like Zelda knockoff, but in like a Lovecraftian world or something like that, or what some pixel art space exploration game, or like a like reduced graphics sci-fi like PlayStation 1 era sci-fi city that you can explore, adventure game. So it's like there's endless options now for me. So I mean, I really like it's a renaissance at the same time. There's really awful practices happening. So it's just more of everything. So there's a comic that I'll have to pull up and send you later. Maybe you can have it on your video that's really relevant to this.
Yeah. Well, in all of these, we have a section in the description that says, in this case, it'll be Ross recommends. And so if you have anything you wanted to
Sure.
link
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
it,
I'll
this
link to
contains.
this gaming comic. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It sums up a lot of my thoughts on it. So yeah, there's bad trends going on, but there's so many options and people who want throwbacks to original, to other styles that they like. As for things I'm glad that left, I mean, it's I don't. It's so far back. I'm thinking stuff like keyboard aiming or like I'm trying to think of other thing. Well, I guess people might be divided in this, but I'm glad turn-based combat is more of a niche thing now. For the people who really want it, they get it, but they're not like in the 90s or 80s. Like if you wanted to play an RPG, it was overwhelmingly going to be a turn-based combat thing. But my brain never really meshed well with that. I mean, I guess I like all the resources we can throw at things. Yeah, okay. I guess there is one thing I don't like as much is it seems like some games things can be a little more standardized in ways that don't necessarily need to be like that. Like I guess I mean this is gonna seem just everybody's gonna think I'm ridiculous, but I'm thinking something like achievements. Like what why does a game necessarily have to have achievements? Like what you know like I have it disabled like so it pops up when you get an achievement because again that's something that sort of takes me out of the game. If it's something that's really atmospheric and I'm getting into it, I don't want that reminder of the outside world. Or I'm trying to think of something else. There yeah, there was something else, but I guess I'm forgetting it, but
It makes me think of when I exit a game after playing it. It's not as relevant because the game's session is over by that point. But if I exit the game and then I get notifications that I have new trading cards on Steam, I'm like, what? Why? Why do I have this?
I don't care about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, what yeah, if I can hide the notification,
Mm,
I'd be fine with that.
right. The thing that you mentioned about achievements is interesting to me because as somebody who's putting together my own kinds of games and will eventually put them on Steam, it feels a bit weird to imagine like even writing them or coming up with them because to me it's like I mean the games that I'm making are like real-time strategy or something like that where it's more about like the achievement is kind of obvious. If you're good enough to play and beat your opponent, then like that obviously happens. So I don't even know what like I'm kind of strapped for ideas unless they're all kind of gimmicky things, in which
Yeah,
case there's no value.
I guess that's why it bugs me. It feels like if you're playing like a great game, like okay, you're talking about an RTS, like you want your highlight to be like this kind of epic battle that you're struggling against the enemy and it's like kind of swelling and building and like maybe you think you have it but then reinforcements come and you're like oh god like that's what you're going to remember. That's going to be like the real high point in you in that game. And I feel like achievements are something where it's almost like junk food level of satisfaction where maybe if somebody is a little more like the obsessive compulsive angle, they're going to feel like they have to do it, but that's not going to be the same kind of high that you kind of want to aim for the game. I feel like the game should be like the real fun part that you're chasing after. I feel like achievements, I guess they're okay as like a bonus thing, but it's like, can you even put a game in like the Steam store if it doesn't have achievements? Or
Yeah, I don't know what the requirements are, but I do know that I mean it feels like it must be just because everybody has them and like
yeah,
you
yeah,
must at least have some minimum or something because I there's a lot of indie games that only have like 5, but I've never seen a game with none. So maybe somebody in the comments might be able to
yeah,
clue us in,
yeah. I
but
mean, I feel like it kind of takes it distracts uh, from like the point of the game is like the game itself is supposed to be fun. So like I feel like everything should be honed in on that. You know, and that's kind of the nice that can be kind of a nice thing about playing old games is, you know, yeah, these didn't have achievements. They had to stand on their own. The game itself has not that achievements are propping it up, but it's like that it's that kind of thinking. Yeah, I guess like with especially like a modern big budget open world things, it's almost like I'm thinking of Ubisoft titles, but several others. It's almost robotic how they'll have like, okay, you have this thing around the map that you have to conquer, this one here, and it's just like, okay, then you have to find this collectible, okay, and then you have to like what unlock and I guess some of that can be fun, but it feels like almost mandatory for a lot of big AAA games to give like maximum hours out of it to the point where I've seen it so many times that it does kind of wake me up more as to like what's happening. But it can vary. But it's like if you're trying to have like a strong story, I feel like maybe you shouldn't have that sort of thing. Whereas if it's the sort of thing where I actually do appreciate that for games where like exploration is really encouraged. So that gives me an excuse to explore more of the area. But yeah, I don't know. It can kind of vary.
I did just check, and it looks like there is at least one game in my library that doesn't actually have achievements on Steam.
Oh,
So
okay.
maybe it isn't. And the
Maybe
reason
it's
I
not
checked,
mandatory.
yeah, the reason I checked is because you mentioned older games, and I know a lot of those have actually seen like post
Oh
mortem
yeah,
releases, so
yeah.
they must not have them unless like whoever's responsible for it added them afterwards or something. So yeah, I guess that makes sense as to why there wouldn't always be. But it's so pervasive that I had to look around a little bit to find anything that didn't have them. So.
Yeah, I think that I just realized. I think that's it. I think the overriding theme for how I enjoy games is I want to get just completely sucked into the game if I'm playing it. Now, if it's the gameplay, that means like my mind is just all about like what do I do? Go here. What's next? How do I react to this? If it's the environment, I'm just going like, wow, look at that, like or the writing, it has me thinking about like, oh, well, what's this character gonna do, or like, is this the murderer, or something like that. So I think that those I like to get drawn into the game. So like the more kind of time, the more a game feels like it's just sort of a time wasting thing. I don't like that. Like it doesn't mean the game can't have like a long grind if that's part of the arching goal. I mean, a lot of action RPGs, it's really just attack the enemy, attack more enemies. Okay, move along, attack. But you're kind of getting the experience throughout the whole thing. Whereas other things feel more like they're just padding out the time. And I've become very aware of that sort of thing, that I have to like everything else in order to tolerate that.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, that's something that it always irks me when I'm playing a game and I know like the Batman Arkham series has this thing where you'll have to mash buttons to open a grate or whatever, and then like it's like why do I like that seems like a silly thing to complain about, but you probably do that at least 100 times during the running time of the game.
Oh wow.
If every time you're doing that, that's like 10 seconds or 5 seconds.
Yeah, see that kind of wakes you up.
Yeah.
Then exactly. Like if it was just a couple times. See, I was thinking that's the sort of thing you might have, like, let's say it was a game like that made in like 90s or early 2000s. Well, that could be, you could see that a couple times because maybe they feel like, okay, well, let's just mix it up a little bit to keep the player going. But if you're doing it 100 times or more, and then you have to mash the button each time, then then it becomes a rote routine, and then that it kind of takes away from the what you're supposed to. I think if you're gonna want to have that level of things that you're repeating, for something like a Batman game, it should be like the combat. So when like, okay, when these guys are coming at me from the side, I need to do this move, and I've learned it. But then you kind of spice it up by having more guys to fight or environmental things, so that it doesn't make you feel like you're just kind of doing a chore.
Yeah. That the feeling of chores. That was another thing. I'm not sure if we've talked a little bit about RTS here. I'm not sure if you've played much StarCraft 2 by any chance.
Yeah, I've played through.
Okay, so there's something that they
not
added.
Not much multiplayer though, but I played through the single player
Yeah,
campaign.
well, the single player is fine because it has some of the similar things. Although I guess
I honestly think Wings of Liberty, for a new player wanting to try a real-time strategy game, that might be the game to recommend. Like it ramps up so easy, I think, for new players.
Yeah, I found it as a veteran be pretty handholdy in that sense, but that's probably because I'm a veteran in that respect. And
I went back and beat it on brutal.
Yeah.
Wings of Liberty. So.
yeah.
Or is brutal the hardest?
Yeah, it is. So you'll know that in that game you can, using your orbital command, you can call down mules, and there's one of the things that they did in multiplayer is they made stuff like that more based around cooldowns. And so it wasn't really an energy cost thing. So like, for example, Zerg have this thing where they can inject larvae into their hatcheries, which gives them more production. And the way that they designed it was that you have to do this on cooldown in multiplayer. Otherwise you fall behind from somebody else who is doing it. So, the opportunity cost is massive, but it's on a cooldown, and it's not about like balancing that with using something else that the unit offers. So it starts to basically be like, if you don't push this button on a cooldown, then you fall behind.
Yeah,
and that's not interesting design, obviously. Like that is just a chore, right?
Like I've heard Warcraft 3 never caught on as much with like the competitive circuit because of the cooldowns.
That might have been a big part of it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've heard. I forget where I heard this from, but somebody more in touch with like the competitive scene than I am. Because then it's almost like a long paced rhythm game on top of your strategy game, and that's not what I want from a strategy game. I want, like, if I have the troops, I want to. I decide I need to use all of. If our base is under attack, we decide we need to use everything right now, and then we're using it right now. It's not because you have enough to worry about with planning your base and like what upgrades you're getting and where your units are at, where they're on patrol, that sort of thing. You don't need this extra. You don't need this artificial timer layer on top of all that. It doesn't make it more fun,
Yeah, and so I feel like that's a trend that's been cropping up in games in general, not just specific to RTS, but like chores have become. I won't say they're a replacement for all gameplay because that would be taking it too far, but it does feel like they're way more common now in modern titles where, like, okay, I have to mash the button to open the door, or okay, I have to, like in Doom, in these new Doom games that have come out, okay, I have to push the button when the enemy's blinking because that way is the only way I can get health. And like, at best they are distractions, and at worst they like completely, in my opinion, pervert like the essence of the game because now you're not even like you said, you're playing some other genre on top of your existing game,
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is, if people really like that, then sure, I mean, if like a certain audience, but I'm not sure they do. I bet if you had like the alternative where all that's removed side by side with that, the player might prefer the original. However, it could be they're aiming for different maximum enjoyment of the game and player retention are two different things, unfortunately. And I think they're probably aiming for the latter a lot more, where they've probably done psychological experiments where they realize, okay, more people stick with the game if we put in these minor walls that make them wait, rather than if we just let them go at their own pace and then they just play the game, they're done, and they move on to something else. We can't have that, so.
Yeah, it's almost like the whole example of, well, I guess it's the inverse example of the monopoly of Microsoft, where it's like they have no competition, but in this case, all of the competition is doing the same thing. So if you don't also do that thing, then the audience retention aspect gets in the way. And that is another thing where it's like you and I prefer to just be able to immerse ourselves in an experience. We can't really do that if we are aware of these trends and why they might be there, and then they're all over the game that we're playing. Like that's just going to suck you right out.
It's not even that I'm looking for them.
Yeah.
It's that I have a flow as I was playing the game, and a more organic setback is an enemy destroyed me, or I've come to a puzzle I'm having trouble solving, or like an RTS is just like, well, damn, that strategy didn't work. I need to rethink this. That feels like an organic setback. But then if it's something like, well, wait a minute, I'm waiting on the game now. Why is this happening? I mean, do we have a cutscene? Like, am I getting story? Or like, see that I think that's why I don't like. Well, that's part of why I don't. This just is a personal preference. That's part of why I don't like turn-based games. Is I don't want to have to wait on the game ever. I mean, I'll wait on it to load, and that's what. And then I'll wait for a cutscene because okay, they wanted to show off the presentation or the story. Fine, that's a valid use. But if it's waiting because it's been designed for me to just wait without some other purpose, then then I get woken up. Because the flow isn't broken. Again, I'm not looking for it. My brain wakes me up when I spot this sort of thing.
One of the things that when I was watching your Freeman's Mind show is that going through the series, it was like there are parts of Half-Life that I feel like are otherwise unexamined by a lot of fans of the genre, where maybe they've only played it once or twice back when they were younger, and then like they have got nostalgia for it, so they remember the good parts or the parts that stood out to them. But they might forget all the things that I think you maybe not so subtly in some cases, but otherwise subtly will poke fun at, like, why is this designed this way? And like there's the example of you pulling the crank to like raise and lower the water after you wake up in the garbage compactor, and you're like, here's the thing that like, why? I guess we had to have the unions must have justified two workers here because one of them has to pull the pump and the other one has to enter or whatever. You have to find creative solutions to why the game was designed in a certain way.
It's not even that it's not even that I'm a Half-Life expert and have
Hmm.
thought about this a million times. It's that when I go through, I'm just looking at this as if it's real from Freeman's perspective. So if I'm just looking at this like, okay, this is real. I'm not just accepting gamer logic. I'm not. So I have to kind of spin like, well, why would it be like this? That's all I'm doing is I'm not. Uh, yeah, actually, it's kind of frustrating some of my fan base and Freeman's mind too, because I actually don't know a ton of the backstory for Half Life and all the extra stuff. I am going almost 100% on what I am being presented in the game, and it actually doesn't give you all that much. I mean, I see. I've heard these things where, well, if you study the environment and look for the clues, then that tells you the story. It's like I don't agree with that 100% because that tells that tells that can tell one story, or that might tell another story, or that might tell a third story. Like if you like so Freeman's noticed like the water levels are lower. That doesn't necessarily tell you the Combine have been draining the water supply. That it just means the water levels are lower, and if you don't have the, I mean, well, I'm kind of injecting some of what I experienced with it when I played the Half-Life games, whereas I didn't really know what was happening entirely. It's just like, okay, well, I'm the rebel against these, but like, why am I going here? It's like, well, wait a minute. What am I supposed to be doing? So, I mean, it works because it's very linear with the approach to it, but I figure, so I'm really paying attention going through it in Freeman's mind. And when I'm given information, I'll use it. But if I'm not, then it's pure speculation. So it's like that.
Yeah, it was entertaining to me personally as somebody who like that aspect of didn't play Half-Life for a long time, and I think the first time I actually played it might have been 2018 or 2019. So I came to it
Oh
super
wow.
late.
Okay.
There was no chance of like rose tinted glasses or
How
anything.
did you? What was your impression of it playing it in modern age? Then.
Well, I could see parallels to a lot of cinematic gaming, where I've described it in a previous episode of this show as it
Oh,
feels like
okay.
one of
Well,
the.
if I'm, don't make me ask repeat. Don't make you repeat what you already did
Oh
in
no,
other
no, no!
episodes.
I didn't go into
Right?
massive detail about
I'm
it.
not trying to do that.
No, that's
too.
fine. I appreciate you looking up for it though. Basically, I would describe it as like one of the first cameraman style games where, like, it's still got the gamer logic, like you mentioned, because it's coming from the id Software angle, where it doesn't have to be realistic. The layouts don't have to make sense. That's just like what can we put in the game. But at the same time, they also like they have this idea, and this was more obvious in Half-Life 2 when I played that after Half-Life 1, is like they have this idea for a cool moment that would be maybe work great in a movie or something, and then they want to catch you have to catch the action from the right angle, and otherwise like you're not in the right spot and you die, or the event that's they're waiting on you to be in a certain position to trigger doesn't happen. Like something that comes to mind is the Strider in Half-Life 2 blows open a wall, but you have to run behind the wall first. So I got stuck on that for like an hour trying to figure out where to go because I didn't know you had to go through a wall. Like it was not a dynamic event that happens normally, so there was no rule for that. And if you're not aware of like if you're not really, I'm not even sure what the reason was that I didn't understand that. Maybe I wasn't told or something, but you have to almost wander
Well,
into it. You know what I mean?
I guess I was wondering, let's say you didn't know all the backstory and just this was just a game you played.
Mm-hmm.
How would you feel about it from a modern perspective?
Yeah,
Fun or kind of I've seen this sort of thing before, or
I definitely felt like there was echoes. Well, not really echoes because it came before them, but I could see like how other games took inspiration from it. Like obviously the Halo franchise is known for it has more open environments in some ways, and there's vehicle sections and all this other stuff. But at its core, it's like you go from point A to point B, and then you do your thing. So I kind of feel like there was that aspect to it. It wasn't my kind of game. I prefer games that you have way more. Like you have a lot of weapons in Half-Life, but it doesn't feel like you have a lot of
options.
options to actually take on dynamic enemies. Like there's a few parts in I think the second expansion pack, or maybe it was the first one, where there's like more free for alls going on, and something that, like that almost never happens.
It
In
might be
that.
the second one where you're out in the forest. Or...
Yeah, that might have been it. I just recall like the soldiers fighting the aliens a lot more, and obviously they're both against you, and so like, okay, well, now there's more stuff happening, but it didn't feel like you got a lot of that action from the first party content from Valve themselves. So that was something
So it kind of felt a little too linear for your taste in the modern age, I
yeah,
guess you'd
yeah,
say.
maybe a bit staged, because I have that complaint about a lot of AAA
Okay.
titles now, where a lot of it feels like you go here, you do this thing, and then if they're still operating on the single player, I guess that's kind of gotten out of vogue now. Where if there's single player games, it's like open world style is more in vogue now, where you can
Yeah.
take on at any action, and that kind of is more to my sensibility. But the open world comes with its own issues.
Have you played the original Far Cry?
I have not. I've only played more
Oh,
modern ones.
how about Crisis? That one's
I
similar.
played the first Crisis for a couple hours. I haven't beaten it.
Okay, I recommend Far Cry, the original, has some of my favorite level design because it's what I would call pseudo-linear. It's like they'd start you like a common level will be they'll start you at like one point of the island. You need to get to the other end of the island. That's your objective. Okay, there's a road there, but there might be other side. Okay, good luck. Figure it out. Like, and I like that because it's when it's complete open world, it can kind of feel a bit. I mean, if you're just looking to explore, it's fine. But if you have objectives, it can almost feel like a little aimless or like you're just. It's almost like you're navigating to your objective, like you're going on a road trip or something, and it's not so much of a game. But with this one, it's you don't have a map. You're just kind of going off the environment, and you can stray off if you want to, or you can stay more on the main path. But it's just kind of like gradually making you kind of connect to the end destination, and then you. I mean, there's also indoor areas that aren't as much like that, but I, I rec I recommend the original Far Cry. It's different from most of what came after.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting because I figured it wasn't really much like the more modern ones that are they lean much more into the open
Oh, they're
world thing.
very
Yeah.
formulaic.
Yeah. And it's funny because you'd think that my complaint about, like, if I'm going to complain about Half-Life and similar games being too linear or too staged, then obviously maybe I would like something that has less railroading. But I do think there's probably a magic formula, like a middle ground where,
again,
yeah.
Crisis is similar in the level. Yeah, both the original Far Cry and Crisis have a lot of similarities where it's just, yeah, like you're following a shoreline, but you can go out in the water or you can go a little bit up the road, deep up the hill, that sort of thing. And I think Crisis might have been a little bit more linear, but
I do remember that there's like a first big fight in Crisis where you can you basically, before the fight breaks out, you can actually approach it from multiple angles, which I didn't know the first time I played it, and then I played it a second time.
Yeah, there's some levels that are very like that.
Right. That feels more welcoming to me, whereas a lot of Half-Life, and I think also the second game, was like you enter into a room and there's enemies and they immediately know you're there or something, and they're like, okay, well, there's one path between where you are and where the enemy is, and so that probably constrained it. That's probably also a product of the time when you consider like the size of games, like how small they had to be, and then the size of levels, and obviously that constrained it. But that was something that I remember thinking.
I mean, Half-Life is also the original especially was a technical breakthrough at the time. Like they like I think that might have been the first game, like in 3D game, they were able to cram a lot more animations into it because I think before then, like they stored like the location of like where all the vertices were on the model and where would it be at this position, whereas at Half-Life they used skeletons inside, so it was just like a wireframe, and they only had to track that, so that was less data they needed to record, and so they could cram more in on the disk because of that.
Yeah, so in that situation, I feel like Valve are really about that more than they're about. I mean, this is going to sound like I'm being pejorative, but it feels to me that Valve are more. They're less concerned with a quality product or like a well-developed concept and more concerned about like where can we push the envelope. And so Half-Life 2 has like, it's almost a tech demo for Source in a way. That's how I feel it. And you can say that like, well, maybe what do you mean? It's not a good game, but like I almost say like that's like a different thing because in Half-Life 2 you've got like, okay, there's the cutscenes, there's the dynamic events, there's the destructible terrain, there's like or destructible environment stuff.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's actually how Serious Sam came about. That they were trying to to publish the Serious engine, and like it kind of escalated into its own game. The I'm not sure on that. Yeah, actually, I like the. I mean, this might be heresy to my viewer base, but I actually like the original Half-Life better because it felt more organic to me. Like, because I'm just going through this. Because again, I still wasn't 100% sure what I was doing, but I felt like I needed to get out of the facility. That felt like the constant direct that made sense, and it just felt like you're constantly having to overcome obstacles and like, oh, can't I make yeah, that was definitely my own thoughts and Freeman's mind when I make it to the surface. It's like, oh, I made it to the surface. I get out of here. Then you're being carpet bombed so that you have to get shoved back. That's demoralizing. It's like, oh man. So Half Life One felt like just one long escape for the most part for me, and so I could get behind that mentally. And Half Life Two, it did feel kind of more gamey, like it was. Well, I'm noticing that more doing Freeman's Mind. That I mean, Half Life was fine with having like maybe a corridor or hallway or something go down, just not really mean anything. It's just there to kind of create the feel of an actual building. Whereas Half-Life 2, it's much more kind of funneled and streamlined, I think, with where they want you to go and what they want you to do.
That's a classic problem that is facing a lot of open world games. At least when I go into them, I see a door and I'm like, oh, a door. And then you can't go in the door. And it's like, okay, well, I guess this is closed door, open world closed door. That's the problem. It's like, what? Why can't I use the door if it's a door? So that's just like them trying to have the veneer of you just use this term to describe something else recently. I think it was NFTs, but you use the example of the houses that were
Oh
built for
yeah,
nuclear
yeah.
testing, and it's
The
like,
prop houses that they
yeah,
used for atomic testing
it's like that. That's what's
on
happening in
Nevada or
open
something.
world games to me. Is like they have all these houses, but they're just there because it's a city and cities have houses, but you can't actually go in
Yeah,
them.
it, it's a balance because uh, to have like the level of interaction that we really want, like the workload gets exponentially higher because well, I mean that was one of the things I loved in Gothic is like you wander. If you haven't played that, you can wander into somebody's hut like an RPG, and it hadn't even occurred to me. I was just looking through stuff, and when I did that, some guy was standing around talking, and then immediately stops and runs over to me. It's like, "Hey, get the hell out of my house!" Like, and I love that because, like, yeah, that's what a real person would react. So it's like if you can go into somebody's house, well, then in order to keep the immersion going, you're gonna need like reactions to this, like and like and it complicates the workload. So it's yeah, you do have the veneer of like a living, breathing city. So I guess I guess in order to do it right, you have to figure out the balance of how to keep that veneer up without and try to steer the player away from things that are going to break it. I guess I don't. It's a tricky problem. I mean, it's or else have a very much smaller scale game where it's just a very small town or even just a neighborhood, but the level of interaction is very high. So you can kind of have like a density of like potential interactions, I guess, with what you're talking about, where you really can do almost everything you can imagine, and there's a lot of anticipated scenarios for all kinds of things, but you can't scale that to an open world and or maybe they will with all these billion-dollar mergers or buyouts of
Yeah,
companies. Maybe,
we might see the fruits of that labor in a couple of years because, of course, game design has not gotten any cheaper. If anything, it's
yeah.
gotten way worse.
So I'm sympathetic towards the developer end of that too. That like, yeah, you can't open the door because that's gonna triple the workload for us if you can open every door and have people react that you should, and we have the interiors and and have the game perform at the frame rate we're aiming for.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's a big can of worms to open up if you wanted to open that door for sure. I wanted to ask you about cutscenes because this is something that also was different very markedly between Half-Life 1 and 2, where Half-Life 1 has one cutscene, which is when you're being dragged around. And I do like to point that out just because there's a lot of people who like Half-Life 1 who are like, it's got no cutscenes, it's great. I'm like, yeah, besides the one where you're being thrown into a trash compactor. But whatever, that's a cutscene.
Oh,
That's
I
the closest
forgot
thing
about
that you
that, yeah.
have, right? Is that's the only thing that you have that's a
Well, in the
cutscene.
intro on the tram, I mean, that's basically
It basically is a cutscene. And that's a good example of like the kinds of cutscenes you would get in Half-Life 2, where you can walk around, but you can't really do anything. Like, you can walk around on the tram, but you can't really do anything yet.
I mean, I'm not sure I remember exactly how I felt about when I first played it, but I mean, especially doing Freeman's Mind too, I that kind of takes me out of the world a little bit because it's like, okay, like let's stop, have everybody look at you, and then of course if you're jumping around in a crazy way, they're not going to react to that, and it. I feel almost like I feel almost like I'd rather have a video cutscene, so like they can kind of control the parameters to keep the story like the veneer up, I guess, you know.
I mean, on the bright side, apparently speedruns of that game involve glitching out cutscenes to skip them, so
I'm
there's
trying to
something.
what game has handled those types of cutscenes the best, I guess, where 'cause I'm thinking Fear was another one where it's like it's all just you're being kind of presented and but then in Fear they might have you like sit on a helicopter and you can look around and then that's it and you're just kind of being fed the information. So it's like uh I mean I guess that's sort of in between where so they're not gonna give you the opportunity to have those kind of screw up moments as much, but at the same time it's like are we is this that much better than just having a cut? I think I don't know. I think I almost want like a well, okay, I guess it saves on disk space not having the video, but I guess I like knowing. Yeah, I guess I almost find it mildly frustrating because if I'm playing the game, I want to interact, like shoot stuff or go wander off here or solve a puzzle. Whereas I'm watching a cutscene, okay, well that's more of a passive thing. Then I want to just sit back and like take in the story. So I guess I kind of want that indicator of like, okay, am I actually playing the game or are we taking a break and we're getting their cutscene? I guess I want that more clearly defined. I guess I don't know. This is probably better on console or gamepad players, but like some of the worst are when you have to follow the character, and then like your default walk speed using a keyboard is faster than the character walks, so you're just like going up quick and then stopping, going quick. Whereas I guess if you're on a gamepad or at an analog control, then you could have a slow walk, but then you're just holding down the key and it's I don't know. The I feel like the even though I've seen it enough times now, I feel like the initial tram ride at Half-Life is a very good way of approaching that because you can just sit back and watch it. But if you want to look around some, you can. It's not it's defining the parameters of what your interactivity is. And it's not making you do anything during that time.
Yeah, I mean, you'll always get to the destination at the end of the day, and your parameters are constricted enough that you won't like do something that is. I mean, that's an interesting way because you gave the example of Fear and your guys on a helicopter. I know this happens in Gears of War as well. Like, there are things though that if you don't like, they might be looking at something, and be like, "Hey, look at this," and you're looking at the other side of the helicopter or something, and so like even that could potentially fall apart, right? If you're not focusing on the thing that is
Well, I
supposed
feel
to
like
be
at
focused
some
on
point you
too.
gotta you gotta just leave a certain amount to the player. If they're saying, "Here, look at this," then if you really don't want to look at that, well, then that's on you, you know? Or if it's, I think there is some fear of developers worrying that, oh no, the player will miss this important aspect,
Yeah.
and then,
Well, that's right. Yeah, I
uh,
was going to go with that from there is that when I try to think about designer brain, like I try to think about it from the perspective of like, how do I make sure that all these elements are working together and that there's no like wasted space, basically, that
ye
every part of the game is justifying its inclusion. The cutscenes are a hard sell for me unless they basically don't look like most game cutscenes, because in most game cutscenes it's like, or things like Half-Life 2 where it's not really a cutscene but you're not really allowed to progress until the talking finishes. It feels like to me that in order to make that good, you have to really engage the player by treating them like an audience member at a movie or something, and like having them presenting them a compelling scene with well written and well acted dialogue, and also like making sure that whatever you're providing for them isn't just rote explanation or exposition where it's like, as you know, any sentence that starts with that is like, well, you're just telling me stuff that I should know, but I don't know because I'm the player. And then that takes you out of the picture. So
another thing I've seen occasionally is where you're getting the kind of story and presentation through audio, but then they have a segment that you're going to have to go through this long hallway or tunnel or something, so that by the time you get there, it'll kind of complete all the audio, even if you're just walking the whole time. Because then that can actually feel good, because it feels like you're still doing stuff, but there's still enough time allocated to give you the story. And I was gonna say, as an RTS player, I absolutely appreciate cutscenes after my mission. I feel like that's my reward. Like that's the dessert there. Like we finally push through the enemy, then we get a cutscene of it being a bomb and the general yelling something. And well, I mean, the original Starcraft had fantastic ones like that. Well, actually, Warcraft too. Actually, now that I think of it, like with
I forget which one had the guy, the king being killed at the end of, I think it was the Orc campaign, but there's
yeah,
some really
the
funny,
Lord
like,
campaign. Yeah.
yeah, it's like really dated CGI or whatever, but it's really funny to look
Oh, the
back at that
music's real
now.
good there too. It's
Yeah.
dun, 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 dun. The or I like the in between stuff. Like after you complete a certain amount of missions as human, you get a cutscene of the foot soldier walking up, and then he kills the orc guard, but then he times uh cutting the catapult so it hits one of the zeppelins of theirs. That or just little things. Like StarCraft has some great ones, like with the like the quiet bass, the Terran bass, like Sarge, and then the proton, yeah, the Protoss end up uncloaking in front of them, and then everything. I oh that stuff was great, and I like that how they continue that in StarCraft too. Like every mission we got, then you get your story. I like for my taste, I like that kind of separation. Like, all right, we're in the game, we're playing the game, we're not getting too distracted by the story. It's just the gameplay. And then when you go through big battle, everybody's like, yeah, and then you get everything. You get your cooldown period after that. I thought that meshes really well with my brain. So.
Okay. I could talk for hours about RTS design because I've been thinking about it for so long, but one of the things that jumps out to me about the storytelling in most RTS games, and I think this is the same line of logic I was going to go down with the Half-Life 2 example, is that you've got the game and then the story catches up. And I appreciate the value of like, you've just sat down from a battle and it was, we'll take an extreme example for most games. Say it's like an hour-long battle. It was really hard fought. You finally beat it. Then you get to have that, like you said, a cooling off period. You get to immerse yourself in what the characters think as a result of that. But to me, it feels like there's a lot of missed opportunity with characterization of so there's obviously people talk about environmental storytelling, where if you walk into a battlefield and it's already got a lot of craters, you're like, oh, I'm not the first one here. Okay, I guess there's been somebody else who tried to challenge the throne. And, yeah, so that can happen, right? That's an obvious case. But if you think about the enemies you often face in RTS games, there's an opportunity that I think is really lost for storytelling. And this is another thing that I've said before, but in Duke Nukem 3D, which is obviously just an FPS, when you do something as Duke, like kill an enemy or kick an enemy to death or something, there's a chance that a line plays where he's like bantering them basically. That you could transpose that system to an RTS where characters in the game, like say you're essentially playing as a player character, and that character has lines. It's not a silent protagonist. You actually talk and engage with maybe your allies and give them orders or something. But then you destroy an enemy base, like somebody's enemy expansion or something, and maybe they have a line of banter back and forth. Like I don't know how you would justify that on a realism standpoint.
There was a little bit of that in StarCraft 2 when I was replaying it. Yeah, I replayed it on brutal. I mean, I just played it normal initially, and then I thought like, there were some things where you're just supposed to hold out. I thought, well, wait a minute. What if I just lower the difficulty and just go on the offense? And there were a couple missions where it'll actually let you do that, and you get a different response. It's like, oh wow, yeah, like they weren't expecting you to do that. So that was a nice touch. We're like the normal way is just defend, hold out. But I thought, hey, let's lower the difficulty and just go on the offense. Can we actually do this? And like, yep, you can. You don't have to hold out. You can destroy the entire base. So that was
Right. And on the flip side, you have, I mean, there's the third mission of Wings of Liberty. When you blow up if you were to destroy the enemy Zerg bases and wipe the whole map, they will still spawn in attack waves anyway, which is, I feel like, kind of cheapens the moment where it's like, well, I should have won, but
Yeah.
I guess they didn't want to end the mission early or something.
That's one of the few things I didn't like about, very few things I didn't like about Supreme Commander is like you play through the campaign and then say, okay, battle area expanded. And then I realized I am just dead meat because I needed to be preparing for this stuff coming from the West that I had no idea that was going to happen. So, I mean, I really enjoy that game, but I don't like I feel like they should have given you more of a realistic chance for if you're going to expand. I like the idea of battle area expanded, but they need to kind of treat it like your player had no idea this was coming because they didn't. So
yeah, it just ends up feeling like a gotcha. Like in the commando missions of the first StarCraft, you would see like oh, here's a spider mine here to kill your hero, and like, okay, dude, fuck off.
I never like, really liked those that much. The command, like you said, the commando missions. I like the full base building, deploying troops, manage.
Yeah. I mean, that's an RTS, and that was another thing that I'm famous for, sort of among my circle of friends, is saying like, oh, here we go, we got to change the pace because I wanted to play a different game, I guess. Like, that's my satirical way of doing it.
Warcraft 2 didn't even have those. They just like Warcraft 1 had them, and then Warcraft 2, I think they just got rid of the commando missions and they
it's been so long since I played it, so I can't remember. But yeah,
I think they gave you heroes, but then you didn't. But then I would actually have them kind of hang back a lot of times because if the hero died, you lost the mission. So I just have them wait at the base and like, okay, let's have everybody else go do the work while we keep you.
Doesn't feel very heroic, does it?
Yeah, it does.
So that's the kind of storytelling that is like. So there's the difference between what the story is telling you. Well, these are weird words because they say like show don't tell, but if we just assume that like there's the narrative and the dialogue and the characters, that's like one part of the story. But there's also the story of what you're facing, and so this is why I think as a separate subject, but difficulty feels a bit odd to have like different selections. I understand it's like almost an accessibility option for players who aren't as good or don't want to put in as much effort.
Cheat codes if you don't want to.
There's that too. But you have to think about like if I'm playing. So say I'm playing an RTS and my opposition is like suddenly less effective because of my difficulty selection, but then like the dialogue tells me, oh, you should be worried about this guy. He's like a tough guy.
I see.
And then you just mop the floor with him.
I guess I kind of see that as like you maybe have to trust the player again, that if they're playing on easy, maybe they're not that great at RTSs, so that maybe it is more of a struggle for them to get that. Yeah, or you can have, I'm trying to think of how, I guess if they, it's tricky because I know I think one of the Mario games did this where there's a funny Penny Arcade comic on it, where if you die a bunch of times, then it offers like an easier mode for you that you can just kind of glide right through it. But I was thinking that might kill the immersion a little bit, but it'd be harder for an RTS because you don't know where the frustration level is exactly before you would want to I guess you would want some way of distinguishing this is a handicap because you need it versus you should take this to optimize your strength as the opposing force, and this isn't really for people looking to play the game the normal way,
Yeah, to me it can just water down the experience if it's presented.
I think if I was just on the fly, if I was doing it, if you wanted to accommodate both camps, just have an easy mode and then just have a list saying this is for people who aren't as experienced and it will not be as challenging. Like, this wasn't the way it's intended to play, but it is here if you're just more interested in the general experience. Just let them know up front, like that when you're selecting what mode you're playing as.
Yeah, that could be one way to combat it, I suppose. The thing that always gets me is when you might have a line in dialogue that says, I mean, in some cases literally, because I guess dialogue isn't everybody's first focus, in especially in some of these older games. But the line might say something to the effect of, like, oh, this character is a worthy opponent. It's like, well, if you have to tell me that, like you could tell me that in addition to showing me that by making me sweat when I'm fighting them. But a lot of the times, like the extent of it is like you've got an AI and they just have infinite money given to them, or they cheat in some other way where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, they're not playing by the same rules. So and then or they're spawning in units like in the Wings of Liberty
Oh
example. So it
man,
feels
yeah.
like,
I a couple months ago I played what was it? I think it was Kill, Crush, and Destroy. It was a
okay, crush, kill, or
Golden Knight.
destroy. Yeah.
Yeah, I played it for the first. Yeah, the cutscenes are great. They were corny, and they knew they were corny. They were having fun with it. Uh, so the dialogue was fun with that, but I realized that it ended up turning into a slog because it's like as soon as I destroyed anything, it's like, boy, the computer was on top of it, rebuilding, getting I mean, it just felt like it was just rebuilding in front of my eyes almost, and it just made it such a slog to get through it. Yeah, I played several levels legitimately until I realized, you know what, I have more. My time is worth a little more than this. So, I mean, if it's a really long battle because it's just that engaging, it's just so much to do in that battle, then great, you know. Well, again, I'm a big fan of Supreme Commander, except for the expanding battle area expanded, but
Yeah, let me just prepare for the cheese real quick because they're about to,
yeah, yeah,
summon some
and
more things or whatever.
I really needed 10 more anti-air units before that happened, you know. Like,
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that we've covered so far is one of the things I brought up sort of flippantly earlier, but it's basically what you were just saying is like you don't really pull any punches or have any concerns about maybe firing in the cheat codes, lowering the difficulty, or in some cases just saying, all right, I'm not playing the game, I'm just going to watch a playthrough of it. And like, so if there's something about it that's interesting to you, there's no concern about like, well, I have to actually see this through to completion. You're much more, I guess, time conscious of
it,
that.
it's well, I don't want to rob myself either. Like if I'm enjoying the gameplay, like again, like if I'm enjoying the strategy game, I just bomb this mission a couple times. I realize like then that's gonna make me think I really just need to figure out a better strategy or but if it's a puzzle I'm really struggling with, it's like, okay, I gotta like figure this out. Or I'm trying to think of, well, again, for first person shooters, Serious Sam pushes me to the limits. If it's just like, no, that felt fair, it was just hard. It's like, then I want to step up and try to do it. But if it just feels like, okay, what this really wants me to do is just memorize this level layout and then press this at this times and have split second, then that's not my kind of fun. Or, yeah, like I'm not a fan of games where in order to beat them, you have to know what's coming. Like there's some, because some games they can be hard, and that's obviously going to be an advantage if you know what's coming. But if you're like really good, like first person shooter with aiming or getting out of the way, then yeah, I don't think there's much in Serious Sam that you can potentially beat on the first try if you're just great at first person shooters. I guess they did have some cheap tricks in the temples, but then that wasn't too much of it. Whereas something like the old game Battletoads, where there's this kind of racing sequence, there is that game is impossible to beat if you've never played it before. It's impossible, like on the first try, on the first try. So I'm not a fan of that kind of game design. Whereas some people like to do this kind of rote repetition and get mastery of that, but that's never clicked with me. I forgot where I was going with this thought.
We were talking about like completing games or just leaving
Yeah,
them
yeah.
and
So if
going
I
to
feel
watch
like I'm
playthroughs or
robbing
whatever.
myself,
Yeah.
like if I do a cheat code and then I realize the next level, oh, it was just that one section that was just a pain in the ass, then it's like, okay, then yeah, I should turn it back off or like maybe load my game and just get through that part. But then if I realize this is just, that if I use a cheat code, I keep going, it's like, wow, this would have been terrible. This would have been just complete misery to play without that cheat. Well, actually, I pull up a games list just from earlier. one game I played a lot not long ago that really skirted that line was I think it was Lacard Chronicles 2. It was a fan-made Castlevania game. It was really well done, but like some parts, it's like it was really testing me. It's like, man, I don't know. I'm getting really close to the cheat threshold here. You know, whereas I played another game, Blasphemous, and I was thinking, I had heard it was hard. It was like, well, I'm mostly hacking it. And then I get to the first boss. I'm realizing, you know what? I'm just not gonna have fun trying to take down this boss at all. And I ended up finding a trainer that gave me one hit kills. And I mean, I'm still just as mortal and vulnerable as I was. And I found that like shockingly well balanced once I did that. Like the rest of the game, it's like, yeah, this part's still challenging. And like, maybe I should have just amplified my damage, but then because I'm thinking, well, that's a Metroid type knockoff game. I'm thinking, well, you know, Super Metroid, you can handle the first boss and like the second, but like that's a pretty good difficulty ramp, and it like, I mean, it's so yeah, but no, I don't 100% like if I'm liking the atmosphere but I'm hating the gameplay, I'm probably gonna watch a playthrough of it. Or same with the story, but or if I feel like I like it a lot except for this one element, then I will absolutely use a cheat to overcome that if I can. Because I mean, I've had too many times it just makes the game more fun or better. Or then once I watch a playthrough, I'm like, oh yeah, I made the right call. Like this wasn't.
Yeah, way more times you've been vindicated than not.
That's my pride does not derive of whether I play a game through legitimately or not. I mean, it can be fun as a challenge if I respect the game a lot, but yeah, well, that's a sign of a good game for me is if I don't even think of that. Like,
Right.
so
You're just like, "Oh, this is hard and I gotta beat it some
yeah,
way." And you
yeah,
don't that doesn't
it's
even enter in your head, yeah.
yeah, it's if it feels like it's on me, it's like, oh no, I could have done better. I know, and
One of
it's
the things
not
that this
the
extends to as
memorization.
well, I think, is your game dungeon episodes, where a lot of the times, I mean, just for the sake of the video, you've got to record this section or whatever. I'm sure there's been plenty of times where you've well, I guess I'm not sure, so maybe you could clear that up. You might have answered this question elsewhere. Are there points where you've just used some sort of trainer or some other external help to get to a specific point for the footage?
Um, Not usually if I'm doing a game dungeon, I'm covering a lot of it. Uh, I've gotten yeah, well, the times I really do that, in fact, I even get somebody else who helps me a lot with that, is if I just need to make a passing reference to another game and I want to show something that might be like hours into it. I'll tell them, yeah, use a trainer, use saves, whatever you can, just get to that point so we can get the footage for that. I think in Game Dungeon, I usually just I'm pretty if I feel like I need to cheat, I just say so straight in the episode, like with Revenant, I did that. Yeah, not really, because I'm usually going through the whole game in Game Dungeon, so it's, but yeah, if it's a passing reference to another game, absolutely. Whatever it takes, whatever it takes, you know?
So I was also going to ask you about this extends. I can totally see where you're coming from the game's point of view, but it's harder for me to understand. I've heard you say this, and I don't. Maybe I'm misconstruing how common it is, but I've heard that you say that when you watch a TV episode or a movie, even you might skip ahead if there's a
Oh,
moment
yeah.
of drama, and it's like, oh, this is
Oh,
not.
yeah.
Get to the interesting part. Can you tell me about what like fuels, like what kinds of things that would qualify as, and also like, do you ever feel? I would worry that I would miss, like even if it's bad in aggregate or a bad moment. Like I kind of want to know that that bad part happened and why it was bad, but that might just be me. Like obviously that's a personal difference, but like, do you
I've
worry that
seen
you
a
miss
lot
too
of
much?
movies. I've seen
Okay.
a lot of movies, so yeah, if I was much younger, I'm not sure I'd do that because I wouldn't have all these references and cues. But it's like, okay, to give you an example, I went to a friend to the theater to see what was it at the time they invited me, was it Freddy versus Jason? You know, it was a slasher horror movie. I'd never seen it. So, like, and when we were watching it, it said like I was noticing we had a scary scene. There was some like light casual conversation. It wasn't like It's kind of a casual thing. And I say, there was they just had a scary scene, but this person's walking to the left and like they've kind of cut the music. I bet there's gonna be something coming from the left, but it's not gonna be a real threat. And then and then it's her boyfriend. It was just like a quick startle. So it's like, and I predicted a couple of those, and they're saying like, I thought you hadn't seen this. I haven't, you know. So the thing is, part of my brain recognizes is if this scene is just going to be filler, or maybe something important to the plot is going to happen here, or I mean, I don't get it right, but I'd say I get it right like 90% of the time or more when I'm doing this. Like if I skip ahead, like whoa, the guy burst out of the closet, I better rewind, you know. So that usually doesn't happen, but um, like one giveaway. Well, I mean, obviously, if it's like a romance movie, it'd be different. But one giveaway is like if it's a typical TV show, and like the characters like a man and a woman relationship, and they're talking about like how we're gonna get through this, or some like nothing ever important's gonna happen, like nothing, like to the plot. Or if it does, it'll only happen by a third person coming into the scene, you know. Or I'm trying to think of some other examples. This happens in good shows too. Like I skipped through chunks of Breaking Bad. That was but like okay, the vast majority of scenes with Walter and his wife are just like this is just like I don't. This is soap opera stuff. I don't care about this. I mean, and then there was a couple bombshell moments, but then those weren't dropped during the scenes when it's just the two of them talking about their relationship issues. But then other parts, I realized, okay, they're talking about like financial stuff with the how they're going to launder this money from the car wash. Okay, well here they're talking about something more substantive. I'm going to watch this scene, you know. And I think there's cues with the music too, like the music can kind of tell you if something's going to happen, whereas if it's just complete silence, that's an indicator maybe this is actually more of an important scene. uh I'm trying to, yeah, Walking Dead has plenty of this stuff with the a lot of the scenes with the characters talking about like I don't know, they're just this is another situation where I'm not exactly conscious of everything I'm doing, but my intuition sure knows. So it's if somebody did a study, they could tell when.
It's funny that you mentioned the music part because I've heard that this happens in a lot of like long running anime series. Like the example that everybody always tells me about is Naruto because that was something that in my age demographic we kind of grew up with. Like I have at least seen a couple episodes of it, but I can't remember what they're talking about. But they say that like the filler music starts happening at the beginning of the episode, right after there was like this cliffhanger about an important development. And as soon as you hear that music, you're like, God damn it. Like, this is just going to be a waste of my
Yeah, well,
time. The
sometimes the
whole
music
episode's
gives it
done.
away, like where
Yeah.
it's gonna go, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for the shows that, yeah, I think there's a correlation between the shows that are gonna spell it out for you with the music like that. There's probably a high correlation between there is gonna be more filler material. A- I mean, the thing is, it doesn't have to be like action or anything else. Like I mentioned Walking Dead, I really enjoyed the conversation I think in the first episode where it's just two cops in the car talking about like what's happening back at home, and it's just a funny conversation that they're were and I'd like to see more like that. Whereas, yeah, my term for this is canned drama, where this is not moving the plot. This is just us reinforcing what we already know. This isn't some grand dramatic climax of the movie. It's just like again, it's like a couple saying we're gonna get through this, or like, oh, I know it's been hard. It's crap like that. I call that canned drama. You know, just like it's just there to fill up the time.
Changing topic, one of the
Sure.
things that I know you've said before is that Well, okay, I'll put it to you a different way. I've noticed in general that you're not really afraid to talk about really any topics that come through. Maybe there's some filtering process that I'm not privy to when you're going through the questions for your video chats, for example. But you talk about all sorts of stuff, and in an era where a lot of people are very conscious of staying in their lane, where they only talk about the stuff that's related to like maybe the subject matter, like in an alternate universe, or if you were more thinking about that more frequently, you might just be somebody who only talks about video games or only talks about stuff like that. Whereas you talk about all sorts of, you talk about like existential threats to civilization, you talk about like geopolitics. There's all sorts of questions that are or topics that get broached on some of those sort of fan AMAs, and that made me think that like, do you think that there's like is there any sense of like, oh, if I might stray close to a line here about a specific topic that I should avoid, or is it like, is there a filter basically is what I'm asking? Because obviously in these days, like the cancel culture is on the rise. Everybody is a little bit more conscious of what they say. Some algorithm that's not even controlled by a human might pick up on some word salad that's added to your talk show somewhere or whatever, and then suddenly you might get hit with a strike, or maybe somebody just cynically reports it. Like there's so many things that a lot of people are worried about. I've never really seen this rub off on you, so maybe there's like, maybe the filter happens elsewhere, but could you say anything about that, how you approach these things?
Well, what I was thinking when you were saying this, not that I necessarily live my life this way, but I was thinking, I think it was Socrates said like, what a wise person speaks because they have something to say. A fool speaks because he has to say something. Like so, my general, yeah, I was thinking about it. There's some questions where if I feel like it was like too personal or getting to a topic where I'm maybe not comfortable with, or like I'm not particularly knowledgeable on, and it's a sensitive topic, then I figure why go there? It's like talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about on this. If it's something where it's just, I mean, the questions are submitted, so they kind of get voted on, so to see what rises to the top. I mean, I figure if that's like towards the top, then that's what somebody wanted to. Enough people were interested in hearing me talk about. But yeah, I was trying to think of filter. I mean, if it was, I don't know. I'm just kind of, if I feel like I can offer thoughts on the situation, I will. But in order for me to do that, I would have to have enough of a composed thought in the first place to be able to comment on it. And if I don't, and I'm just speculating, I say as much. So yeah, I mean, I'm just, and of course, I've just made me flash back in the the '80s version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They're asking for commentary on Zaphod Beeblebrox, and the psychiatrist saying, "Zaphod, it's just this guy, and like that's how I always feel about myself about this. I mean, I think some people on the internet, I'm kind of anti-drama. I don't really enjoy it, so maybe I unconsciously take techniques to kind of diffuse things. I feel like I'm someone who could be a competent negotiator, as far as like a hostage negotiator, something like that, like talking down the other side. I guess with a lot of topics, I can try to put myself in another person's perspective or their shoes and figure out, okay, well, what would make sense to me if I had these goals, or if I felt about this topic this way. So maybe it's that sort of thing that helps. Yeah, like, I mean, even with this games as a service stuff, I don't really enjoy getting into that. It's more like that just keeps popping up in my face that I feel compelled to kind of keep pushing back on it. If that got solved, great. Then I could stop talking about it and just go back to my other stuff. But I mean, for different, I don't know. So
No, that's fair. Yeah. I was mostly curious because I've noticed there's this prevailing sentiment that you're like, I just get this vibe from you that you're very like aware that this career of being a person who makes videos on YouTube definitely didn't have to happen. It wasn't inevitable. It wasn't even a plan like you've mentioned elsewhere. Like, this is just, is there an element where you kind of wake up every day or every now and then and you're like, oh yeah, this is still what I do. Like, I'm still doing this instead of any of the hell jobs I've had.
It's more like, I've said before that, like, the fact that millions of people have seen some of my videos has never really fully registered as real to me. It's like that's kind of creeped into what I do now, and you'd think my brain would have adjusted, but it hasn't seemed to have. So it's like, and plus, it doesn't help that in the course of doing YouTube, I have seen my pay drop in half over the course of like a month or two, multiple times in the past for different reasons. I had to kind of claw my way back up from. So it's kind of left me in more jittery mode a bit as to like the stability of this, and I have to kind of convince myself this is still a stable thing. That it's like I've been doing this a long time, and like my brain is still convinced. It's not convinced this is a viable career. Like,
Yeah, you're almost still feeling like at any point it could just come tumbling down.
Yeah, I do have a certain feeling like that, but like emotionally, rationally, I can kind of think that like, no, this is likely to be able to continue this sort of thing. And if I was going to lose a ton of fans, it's probably already happened by now. That sort of. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that this also reminds me of is the fact that you have had this. You've talked about your aversion to doing any sort of like request of money. Like, you have the fun filled begathon where you at least try to make it funny, a fun video to watch in that sense. But even still, like, you don't make a big stink about. A lot of people will say, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my Patreon and stuff. Like, you don't really have those reminders like plastered everywhere. It feels like that is also an extension of what I was just mentioning about, like, you're aware that this is not a normal thing and you're aware that it didn't have to happen. And that, like, there's something about that leaves you feeling more earnest to the average viewer, I think. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on this particular, like the whole fiscal side of things and trying to maintain it. But, and obviously in some cases it's also a personal topic as well. But it was just something that I've noticed is that you don't exude the same feeling that a lot of other people on the platform do, where they're very much like, how do I make this number go up? And you're just like, can I keep these things around me intact long enough to do what I want?
I really laid out my thoughts about that in that Begathon video about monetization. Because, that kind of, I understand why a lot of people, I'm lucky in that I was able to start sooner. So that gives me a sort of a home advantage on YouTube. So I understand why people do it. However, at the same time, when you do have that on the video, it does cheapen the video some, the experience of it. So I try to kind of prioritize like having a good experience for whoever's watching the video. See, like, that's the thing. I don't really feel like entitled to any of this. So it's I think I said in that video, I look at this entirely as me pressing my luck. So I'm trying not to like drill it in on people. And yeah, no, I don't monetize things as much as I probably could. If I've gotten a lot of emails asking me to advertise stuff like mobile games. I think there was some for like a wallets, VPNs. I got a lot of ads for those, but it's like, I mean, I kind of have my attitude is I'm not like a holier than thou that I'm above selling out, but it's kind of like I don't want to sell out more than once. Like, it's kind of like if I sell out, I want it to be for like a king's ransom so that I only have to do it once. And what I've found is that with a lot of this stuff, no, you have to keep selling out, like each time, repeat it and go again. And again, for however my brain is wired, that reminds me, apparently in the filming of the movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd, the oh my god, I forgot his name. One of the guys playing the stockbrokers had a scene where at the end where he's getting angry and he has to go on this tirade of swearing. Yeah, yeah, Don Amici. And the actor apparently on set said, like, okay, everybody listen up. Like, what? Everybody do a good job because I only want to do this once. You know, because so he didn't want to. He didn't like swearing, you know. So if he has to do it for the role, he wants to just do it once and get it right. And that's kind of. And apparently he did a great job. The director loved it when. Uh, so that was kind of my attitude about the monetization and asking people for money. Is that like, you know, I don't like being a burden on others, and at the same time, I'm at that point in particular, I could see where it's going. Whereas if I only had to rely on YouTube, I would have been in trouble a long time ago. So when I made that video, I wanted to just do the best job I could at it and hope for the best. And that's that's thankfully been enough to sustain me. And then in the video, I emphasize yeah, I mentioned the one type of person who I wanted to donate was the one that just has more money. They're not even so much money. They're not even paying attention to everything they're spending it on. And I emphasize, yeah, be sure to hit the recurring payment option. Like, you know, like
Yeah, of course.
so,
That's the kind of
uh,
person who doesn't cancel their Amazon subscription or anything like
yeah,
that.
yeah. That they just don't even think about it. Like money's just yeah, whatever. Like it's
That is a classic. One of the things that I feel like I don't hear you talking about too much is, you talk about the movie and you talk about you're going to make this action comedy style movie with a bit of a mystery twist is how I've heard you describe it
yeah.
before.
So
And obviously I'm not asking you to divulge details because when it's done and it's out, it'll be available for everybody. But did want to ask you about your thoughts on like directing movies and like scene composition and all that stuff that, I haven't really heard you really go into any sort of detail on. I may have just missed the videos, of course, but I haven't heard you talk about that. Like what kinds of scenes strike you as things that give you inspiration, maybe not to do something exactly similar, but like that's the kind of vibe you want to go for in the stuff that you want to do or whatever. So to whatever degree you feel comfortable
I
talking about
mean,
those kinds of details, it would be cool to
I
hear.
I can like lots of different kinds of movies. I mean,
Sure, yeah.
I mean, for this one, I mean, for the movie I'm working on, it's almost everything I do. I think has some comedy in it because it's more fun for me to do it that way. But for the movie, I kind of I feel like it's not it's kind of a like an underdeveloped genre, especially in Hollywood movies, is sort of a comedy adventure, but one that's like the one where they're really trying to keep up. They're trying to do a good job on both sides because I feel like a lot of, especially more modern comedy adventures, they'll kind of cheapen the adventure aspect of it by having a little too many like goofy jokes where the characters aren't taking like the situation real. But uh, I mean, there's been some like the what was it? The newer Jumanji ones did a decent job of that, I thought, where they were the characters were keeping the threat real, like, however, at the same time, it was goofy and there were a lot of jokes in it, so, because that's kind of a pet peeve of mine is when unrealistic human behavior. You can have the most fantastic, crazy world you can think of, but if the characters don't act like real people, that just pulls me right out of it. Um, but I mean, also, I think that's the sort of genre I think I could do a better job at than others. But I mean, some that come to mind for comedy adventure. Well, okay, I don't mind listing a few influences without giving too much away. It's not going to be like this, but as an example of a good comedy adventure, something like Ghostbusters or Back to the Future or Inner Space or Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. You know, those all have a strong comedy element, but they also have like a real adventure aspect to them. Also, um, let's see. But for okay, I don't mind saying one of the inspirations, part of the movie. I mean, some are just like a couple Twilight Zone episodes I'm thinking of, But another one is this is an old movie. It's a comedy, black and white comedy, Whiskey Galore. It's about this village that's, I think it's like during, supposed to take place during World War II, and it's about this village that the supply lines have run out, so they've basically, the entire town has run out of alcohol, and so everybody's sober and miserable and depressed, and but there's this shipwreck off the coast that was carrying like thousands of bottles of whiskey, and so like the entire village mobilizes to try to go and get it before the law enforcement can keep on track of it, and they get to it, and then afterwards the law enforcement's trying to catch up, so they're just hiding it everywhere, and it has this comic element I appreciated. Yeah, that's an old one.
That sounds like an absurdist premise, but something that you could easily, like you were saying earlier, the realistic human
Yeah.
behavior
Oh
could
yeah.
still
Oh
shine
yeah.
through.
It's. I mean, it has a light tone to it, but
Yeah.
it's. But at the same time, I can, like, for instance, I don't think that would be a good choice to direct something like a political thriller or a spy movie, because I was thinking some spy movies with a complex plot, because I'm thinking sometimes I watch those, I can enjoy them, but I'm thinking I don't know how they keep track of all this that's happening here with the, or giving the right emphasis, or another movie I like a lot, like the movie Heat, is a good kind of like hard boiled kind of crime movie. I mean, I can maybe make a movie like that, but I don't think necessarily that'd be my strength at it. I wouldn't have all the. I don't think I'd have as many like impulses and intuition about how a scene should be handled, or same with a lot of drama. I don't think the. So I mean, this, I can enjoy those kinds of movies, but that's not necessarily where. As for inspirations, it's like I can take the smallest thing from just random. I think just even in this conversation, I've been doing that from just random movies that my brain will make the connection. I'm thinking, yeah, I really want something like that. Like again, I just pulled that one aspect from Trading Places just out of nowhere. So my brain, the influences are just all over the place. So with movies.
It's interesting to think about how different your work would be if if the, not necessarily inspirations, but just your experiences, like watching certain movies or like playing certain games, if those experiences were different or didn't exist, like if you just deleted one movie from your mind or something, like how many knock-on effects that would have. Like this is more of a philosophical or like almost an unanswerable question in that sense. But is there a movie that you have seen or a game that you've played that you wish you had like stumbled upon earlier in life, so that you like, because it wound up influencing you massively in some respect? Or like, is there a seminal
Maybe.
moment potentially?
Maybe, but I've probably forgotten it if there was. Uh, I mean, yeah, I guess. Well, okay, yeah, yeah. I guess sort of a. I didn't get to watch. I only saw snippets of it, of Beavis and Butthead when I was growing up, and I didn't get to watch the entire thing until much later. And for sure, I would have enjoyed that as younger. I guess the upside is I enjoyed it. I probably even saw more things watching it later than I would have when I was younger. But so, I mean, there's a few things like that, but I don't know. Not that I can keep track of. I
No,
just.
yeah, sure. That's one of the things that also is sort of adjacent to this as an idea, is like there's only so much time in the day, as you're well aware, and you have this giant list of games you want to get through. But at the same time, it's like, are there examples of games, or just broadly speaking, any sort of medium that you feel like you should make time to revisit and you would get something out of it? Because obviously, you, like you just said with the Beavis and Butthead example, like you drew more out of it. You to some degree, art is like you get what you bring to it in that sense, and so you have to be in a certain stage of life to get a certain kind of output by just watching it. And then in the same way, like is there something that you feel like if you revisited it now in life, like for the second time maybe ever, that you would get something valuable out of it, or something that might change your perception on things.
Oh yeah, but usually it takes a while. What I like to do is just wait until it's naturally faded in my memory so much that I feel like I kind of want to go back to it because I've lost so many details of it. Like I'll do that with movies. I remember, I remember the few that I remember. I was thinking, I remember this movie being a trip as a kid. What was it actually like that? And yeah, it really was. There were some the like I remember The Adventures of Mark Twain. That was a claymation that I saw as a kid. And I watched it again. It's like wow, this movie is art. Like with the music and just the composition, everything. But it had been like 20 or 30 years since I had seen it, so it wasn't. Uh, there was another movie I saw as a kid. Was it The Peanut Butter Solution? I mean, I know you're asking about games, but it's the same mentality. And I watched that again. It's like, yeah, this movie was kind of trippy, like what they're doing here. Uh, the yeah for game. Well, for games, it's two things. It's primarily that. Well, one, I had to enjoy the game on some level, or just felt like something was unresolved with it with me, which is what I've done with several game dungeons, and there'll probably be more also. And the other is that, well, especially with we were talking about at the beginning with AI and 3D, even without AI, with software, I've been able to get a lot of older 3D games working in stereoscopic in VR. And so being able to revisit that has been definitely been an incentive to revisit some games. Like I've played through the original Unreal now and stereoscopic VR vision. It was a different experience for sure. I've been doing that with one of the older Need for Speed games, and I want to do some of Deus Ex that way, though. I think I'll probably just kind of load games and kind of wander around in that because I think the HUD would be too much of a barrier trying to play it legitimately because that's really energizing me wanting to go back to these games that had very impressive worlds because it's just a different. Well, the analogy I make if somebody's never tried VR, it's the difference between watching a movie about a location versus actually visiting that location. It's like that difference. So.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually been able to try VR yet, but it's one of those things that I feel like if you have a penchant for wanting to explore something or experience something more directly than what we currently can, like the VR is the in between of like watching a movie and like having a neural implant make you as the protagonist or something, you know?
Well, for what it's worth, I'm not sure it would do as much for RTSs
Oh yeah,
because
sure.
you're generally looking top down. What VR would make that would do for that was it would make it like you're playing a tabletop. Is
Right.
what it would
Okay.
do. So that's not the same thing as opposed to being on the ground level, kind of looking up at the sky, and
Yeah,
seeing
but for FPS
caves.
games or something like that, it could be a big deal. Like you were talking about the older games. I think you mentioned before in other content that you've been playing around with Quake. Is that correct in VR, or was it one
Uh,
of the older games?
I think it was. I played through Kingpin. That was based off Quake 2 engine.
Oh, okay,
It
that
might have
might have
been
been
it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was floored how good that looked. And that game, I think it came out in like '98 or something like that. I mean, it was a Quake 2 engine. Yeah, boy. You, that's something you can see in like some of the well-made games is that even if the technology was limited at the time, the art direction was really good. So it's like they had their vision. It's just, and they just scaled it down to whatever the technology was. So even though these are muddy textures, they all flow together and they look good. Yeah, I was really surprised by that.
Yeah. One of the things that comes up every now and then in some of the content that you produce is when you mention, maybe getting help with an editor or somebody to come in and do some of the work for some of the heavier lifting for game dungeons specifically, I've noticed is, you kind of want people to maybe rely on. I wanted to ask you about the sort of challenge that's intrinsic to that, which is you have this thing that you want to make great, you have to give up control of it and almost like put your faith in another person to do a good job in that respect. And like, could you walk us through a little bit about how that process has gone since the first couple of recruitment
I'm
drives, so to
still
speak?
dead in the middle of it for video
Yeah.
editing, but I mean, I've done that with other things like maps for like civil protection or uh, actually some of Freeman's mind, or for sound effects help for Freeman's mind. I mean, it's like I just again, I kind of care about the end goal. So if I feel like a particular person is like, yeah, they're doing a good job, I could my brain could probably envision like 500 different ways this could play out well. So, but if I mean, it's a very subjective thing. That's why I'm in the process now of hopefully getting video editing help. I'll just have to see how it is. If I feel like they're just not on the right wavelength, even after like trying a couple rounds with it, then I'll keep editing the videos. But if I feel like, oh well, this is different, but it's still good and I like it, then great, you know. So, uh, yeah, it's less. It's not about having to do it my way. It's just about I have my own subjective quality standards that I want hit one way or another. So, I mean, I could be too picky, especially for what I'm doing, but it's I won't have to compromise much on the movie, so that's the way I look at it. So.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. The one of the things that this leads me to as well is the idea of like, so you talked about you don't care. We this is even something that came up earlier. Is that I mentioned the whole AI creating the game thing, or in your case, the movie. You're mostly concerned about the output, the destination, so to speak. The journey is like, how can we do this as efficiently as possible? I guess is one way to put it.
Well,
So
you know, I mean, it's not, you know, making a movie on a computer isn't the same as like making it on a set with other actors around you and going to different locales and having people in costumes where it's, you know, or something like where it's kind of fun and yeah, it's more of an experience. It's more just working on whole lot of it is just working on a computer, manipulating multimedia. So it's not, it's not the same kind of fun you would have for necessarily other mediums, at least for me.
right. And so to further illustrate that point, it's almost like, you know, in the past, I was thinking that if I was going to get somebody to edit a video or something like that, similar to what you're looking for, I would, you know, I would almost be approaching it like you have to edit it. You're editing it for me more than you're editing it for the audience. And I wanted to know
Oh.
how that sort of squared for you, because you mentioned that you have your own subjective standard, but how much does the audience like, do they exist as a specter in the back of your mind? Are they more like a, oh yeah, they're waiting for because I've heard you talk about like, oh yeah, I don't want to make them wait for videos, but about the quality of the videos, that seems to be more circling back to your own personal standards. So like, is there a point where you ever feel like if it, like basically, is it if it passes your standard, it's as good, it's going to be good enough for the audience, or how does that work in?
That's more or less how I think of it. Look, because if I don't have that, then I'm kind of lost. Because okay, if the video, because even then, like say it's a genre I don't really care for, I can still sometimes recognize if it's done well. Like yeah, like I'm not big into musicals. I don't really care, but if I can tell that like it has a good production, like the songs seem to be on point, like the voices sound good. Okay, well, this seems good. I guess people who like musicals will like this. But but yeah, if the video doesn't, yeah, if I'm trying to guess what the audience wants and I don't like the video, or I'm just it's not doing much for me. Again, I'm just lost because I'm thinking, well, who's my audience then? Like, I don't really. I mean, yeah, I probably could. I guess what it is then I'm putting out like what I would think would just be a not as good video, but can still get enough views because I have my platform that I've been doing for years. And yeah, maybe that's enough to milk it to keep a certain number of people. But it's like, but then that just raises too many questions. Like, well, wait, why am I doing this rather than try and just do like just a raw activity to make money than this for as opposed to something that I think people will enjoy. You know, yeah. So for the it's kind of has to pass through my filter. It's like, well, would I enjoy watching this if I wasn't me and I just stumbled onto this, and even then I can get lost. But I usually think like, well, I think so. There's an Onion article uh, where in the Onion where they're saying the video editor for America's funniest home videos no longer can tell if video is funny anymore. Like, and yeah, I've been there before, where it's where you're just so deep into it, you're not sure. But at that point, I just try to rely on like things I've done in the past. Does this seem about right? Let's like, so I don't know.
And then there are examples like the pirate episode of Freeman's
Yeah,
Mind
yeah.
from Half-Life 1. I wanted to ask you if there have been notable moments where like you've put something out, it passes your filter, you're like, yep, video's high quality enough for my taste. But then like there's enough of a backlash or a negative response where like it makes you second guess yourself. It's like this. It's kind of a silly example to bring up the pirate episode.
Yeah. I'm probably forgetting him offhand. Not for the pirate episode. I mean, for Freeman's Mind, my entire attitude was keep moving forward. Like, don't look back. Okay, well, maybe it could have done whatever. We'll do better. We'll try to do better on the next episode. That's so I wasn't too worried about that. For other things, yeah, that did happen with one thing, but with when I did the moon gaming thing, where that was going to be just more of like a commentary with someone else, where just it was kind of more of a reaction thing, like lower effort level thing, and the reaction wasn't very good. That was an experiment for me anyway. That wasn't something where I was convinced this is going to be great and answered everything. That was just more me trying to make ends meet thing. But the reaction was fairly negative, so I decided to cut it. So that's well, Freeman's Mind was an experiment also, so it's kind of that was a more successful one.
I was gonna say, yeah, seems to be a sweeping success in that respect. So it's interesting to me. I guess we can have this be one of the, more or less the last topic we talk about here. Is I wanted to get your opinion on maybe some trends in technology specifically that you're noticing, because you already brought up the movement in the direction of what you had in mind for your dream software, where you can amalgamate the the depth map with the 3D material data, and then you can create this world that you can just explore yourself.
AI is okay. Well, not to cut you off, but like I was going to
No,
say,
go ahead.
AI. My understanding is for the pandemic, it actually that's actually what got the vaccines out as fast as it did, because these resources have been developing, and they've been they were able to find solutions that wouldn't have been possible under normal humans, because they can recognize so many patterns. And apparently it's gonna. I think AI is like the most exciting place in technology at the moment. Okay, so sorry. Go ahead with your
Well,
question.
that's a perfect sort of jumping off point, because I was going to ask you about like, there's some people, Elon Musk is famous for sort of waxing philosophical about this. And maybe it's even real because he's obviously behind Neuralink, but, talking about the union of humankind and technology. And so like, there's plenty of Black Mirror episode style dystopian horrors that could come from that. But if we had to look on, I won't even say a positive side, just what you think might happen based on the technological progress that's been made recently. You said AI is exciting. In what ways do you think stuff like AI technology in general will change in, say, just in the near future, like certainly within our lifetimes?
Okay, that's a broad question. Well, again, I mentioned AI. I think is going to open up stuff we may not have thought possible. Like, I mean, yeah. It used to be a meme of, I think it was on the CSI show, of like zoom and enhance, where they would zoom in. Well, that's actually getting halfway real now. So that's, but boy, okay. So the question is, yeah, how is technology shaping things? I guess,
Yeah,
or
and you could just pick one thing or however many things come to mind about like ways where there will be a paradigm shift within the general way humans live out their
I
lives thanks
am
to technology.
noticing with software, we there is we do seem to be moving into kind of fiefdoms, with major companies getting larger and trying to control the entire ecosystem and control as many aspects of as possible underneath that. I mean, I mentioned Microsoft earlier, like with I think Adobe's been trying to do that with like a lot of multimedia applic. Oh, uh, there was some news article a while ago where there was some a business I wasn't even aware Adobe was involved in, but I forgot what that is. But we're seeing mergers left and right. Like I feel like there's a month that doesn't go by where there's not some major merger going on between companies worth billions of dollars or acquisitions. So with technology, unfortunately, I think we're heading more and more towards just having everything kind of thin clients for everything. Where it's just the company controls everything and you're given access. Uh, I mean, I think there'll be pockets of resistance against that, but that seems to be where a lot of things are going. For um, I guess we might see more emergence of maybe local production within countries, partially because of the pandemic, also because manufacturing stuff with like 3D printing has made manufacturing not in many areas not quite the overhead requirement that it used to be for several things, and we were shown some vulnerabilities of the supply chains during the pandemic for sure. Uh, let's see, what were some other trends that I'm trying to think of in technology? I'm not worried about an AI consciousness taking over things with like Elon Musk is. I disagree with Elon Musk on a few things. Uh,
If you wanted to vet those grievances here, that's fine
well,
too.
one, I mean, this is sort of topic. Well, one he was talking about where I think he said recently that like underpopulation is like one of the biggest threats to like civilization. And the thing is, he's not entirely wrong, but that strikes me as a very short-sighted way to look at it, where um, our economy is basically based on per- persistent growth, like persistent growth. However, we are on a finite world, and a lot of our prosperity over the past 150 years or so, from the Industrial Revolution onward, has been through just like, I mean, innovation for sure, but also some of the greatest extraction of resources than at any other time in human history. And there are limits to that. Yeah, that's one thing I was going to say is the difference between infinite resources and abundant resources is not really obvious at first. It's kind of it feels similar, but once you start approaching limits, then you need to adapt, and we're not really don't seem to be adapting to that. However, I mean, yeah, that's a complicated thing, but the point is, it is kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. However, I see it as being much more damned another way with not being I feel like it's kind of become necessary at some point, one way or another, to scale down our growth and population, everything. I think I need to find the article. I think there was like these Australian ecologists that they did an estimate that the carrying capacity of the Earth without fossil fuels or non-renewable resources was about 1 to 2 billion. So even if we level, now there is the argument that if we as we develop, as countries get more developed, they have lower populations and it can stabilize. But I've heard that number at the rate we're going, like if every country was developed at a similar rate, then we would level off at around like 10 or 11 billion. So it's like, this is something we should kind of take more seriously, but I think we're probably going to do things the hard way. But yeah, I was trying to think of stuff more specific to technology, that how it's going to shape things. I mean, I mean, I guess with finance, it's who know. I don't know where it's going, but one thing I have heard that by all means fact check me. I think 80% of all dollars in existence were printed within the past 2 years. So, however, the U.S. dollar is also the world reserve currency, and we also have like the largest military in history. So that takes us to weird places that I think it creates some problems that I think we're going to try to use technology to sort of like, let's go this way and like, or like, let's see if we could not pay as much attention to this. I could see there's speculation things could become far more digital as far as uh, the economics go. But again, I can't. I don't pretend to know how that's going to play out. But that does strike me as an area that's ripe for change. So yeah, medical advancements I think are going to kick off. I think very much because of AI. Multimedia stuff is where I'm really interested in it, and that's gonna uh, it's amazing from the glimpses I've seen so far. Finance for technology. I'm still not too bullish on space travel. I mean, I'm sure we can maybe get things into space more efficiently. The best use I can think of for that is get more observation telescopes going to be able to see more of the universe. And plus, I don't think we can have too many spotters for potential asteroids headed our way, that sort of thing. But I think we've hit some real hard limits of space travel. It's just kind of refining what we're able to do. Um, do you have any other things you're thinking of for technology for fields? Or?
I was thinking that if I was to sum up some of the things I've heard you say, and in some ways I definitely agree, especially specifically regarding the fiefdom aspect of a
Yeah,
lot of these like really high value companies conglomerating together with these giant acquisitions. You know, your point about the money being printed en masse recently, it feels like when you see these numbers, like for the average person, they see like 80 billion might as well just be like some imaginary language you just invented, like 6,000 quing bing bong or something. Like what does that even mean? You
yeah,
know, like it's these unknowable, unimaginable numbers that basically make it feel like there's not even really, like they're making up the rules as they go along if they have that much money, you
yeah.
know.
I was literally talking about this with a friend. I think last night. He was asking like, well, how high does it have to get before it's a problem? Or like what's the actual limit that you can have in like debt or something like that? Because I think we're at like 30 trillion or something like that. And yeah, for the average person, this is just a dream numbers. This doesn't mean anything. I guess the idea of the limit, I think it's very psychological as part of it, is where if other countries on a different system stop having faith in that and they can get away from a dollar, then that can have repercussions. Or if the system is just managed in such a way that, let's say it's 30 trillion now, let's say the debt's 1 trillion, or let's say the debt's like 1 quadrillion. Uh, that number may not matter so much as are do people have enough jobs? Are people like have a home to live in, or is there food at the grocery store, that sort of thing. And whatever the number is, when that starts collapsing enough, that's where the number. Yeah, it's a hazy thing, and the line drawn between like something like national debt versus the country running is incredibly complex. I can't even imagine how many steps there are in between that. But I think that's where uh, I need to fact check this, but my understanding is Thomas Jefferson was apparently like on his way towards France to like discuss with the aristocracy a way to kind of stabilize France, with the peasantry, so they wouldn't revolt. Like as the French Revolution was happening, like he was on his way, and then the French Revolution started. So I need to double check. So the idea is like he realized this was a problem. We need to make sure more people had to have enough to eat, and their lives are whoops, So it's kind of it's it's kind of like that. It's like it's hard to know where that line is.
Yeah. I mean, this is another truism I think that happens is that if there's ever some sort of revolution, be it political or technological or anything else, you don't know that you're in it. You only know when it's over, I feel like a
Oh,
lot of
I
the time.
think I think the French Revolution people knew they were in. If you don't have enough to eat and your neighbors don't have enough to eat, and like people all over the city are just, and there's an uprising. Yeah, I mean, I guess we
There's
haven't
that
really seen that
flashpoint
on that
moment.
scale, but
Yeah. There's the moment that where the uprising starts to spark off, or as the unrest. It's what I'm saying is it feels like it's hard to draw a line and say it starts now because really it might. You can make a compelling argument that
yeah,
it started when people stopped having enough food and they just didn't react. Like there's the lag time,
yeah. I
like
don't know if like you can pinpoint like what
mm.
day.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it can be weird to know when you're in the middle of it. All you know is that something is
Well, I'll
wrong,
say
really.
this. Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. I have an overwhelming sensation that we're in a transition right now.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what I feel like we're in.
Speaking of transitions and being in such states, I wanted to ask you about if you've given much thought into after the movie comes out. So basically, the simple question is: are you still making videos once that's out, or like
Well,
have
I
you
think I'll,
decided?
I'll, I'll I think for sure I'll continue the regular videos. As for big ones, I'll have to see how I feel. I saw a snippet, the angry video game nerd, uh, how am I, James Rolfe. He said they asked him if he was going to make another movie, and he had such a great response. He says, "Well, that's kind of like asking, oh, well, you had a kid, are you going to have another kid?" Like it's like, well, he wasn't really ready to answer that yet, and so I'm assuming nothing for how I'm going to feel after I make the movie. So it could be I'll be so burned out from animation technical work that I never want to touch it again, or I might be really enthused if I can get more help, that sort of thing. So it's just hard to say. But I'll keep doing like I'll keep doing stuff like Game Dungeon. That doesn't take as much out of me as what the movie will. So
So fans can expect that series to live long and
yeah, yeah,
prosper. Then,
that's the whole reason it was created, is because I realized eventually Freeman's mind's going to end. So, but whereas Game Dungeon is not really a limit on that. So.
do you feel like there's a like you've referenced in especially towards the beginning of the conversation that there's loads of follow-up videos you're planning? Like there's the follow-up video that's going to be Linux specific and the follow-up video to the GUI video. And do you feel like you sometimes will get into that where you've got this video idea and like, oh, I've got to do this answer because of the reception or because some other development, like it feels like, like you said, you didn't intend or really want to get into the whole dead game news thing, but it felt like you had to, or there was something had to happen and something had to move. So that is certainly understandable because that's even an evolving situation. But then there's other times where you're like, I've heard you talk about the process, or you think this will be a small video and then it ends up being really long and also needs a follow up. Is that a following trend for you in general?
No, in fact, I'm trying to clamp. I'm trying to like. I'm thinking of almost like in RPGs, like quest lines that have kind of gotten out of hand. Like, all right, we need to finish this one, so then we can get back on the main quest. I'm kind of looking at it like that, and hopefully I get help so I can kind of get it out with less. I mean, some I'm willing to sacrifice if I just get too bogged down. But I really do want to make a follow up to the GUI one though. But the Linux one, that's not really going to be a follow up. That's just sort of a side. That one will be a lot easier too. That one's just going to be me basically talking. The Linux one.
All right.
Listen.
Well, I guess on that subject, if there's any sort of like video teasers or something for people who are following in the moment, this will date the episode, but
Oh,
that's fine
okay.
if
Yeah.
you wanted
Well, the
to
next one I
comment on that.
have planned is going to be side video I've been trying to make for years. Definitely related to games and operating systems. I'm not sure I've seen anything like this come out. This is another one of those things where I feel like someone, you feel for sure someone would have done something like that. Well, you mentioned with the GUI video, you hadn't seen something like this on a major channel. I haven't. I feel for sure somebody would have done something like this, but I haven't seen it. So this is a video like that I'm doing, and then after that, I have other stuff coming too. It's just a juggling act.
We at the No Frauds Club thank Ross for his time. And if you too believe that the video game curse can be broken, we invite you to follow along with us.